Prologue. There was only one word that could possibly describe Astrid's emotions right then: shock. She was staring at Hiccup as if he had grown out a second head. She was waiting for him to take back what he said, but he just kept standing there. A determination that she never suspected she would see on his face was gracing his features. Yes, this one simple word echoed in her mind. It didn't require an eloquent speaker to say it, but the way Hiccup did, it made her realize that she was indeed facing Stoic's son. He was always slouching if she recalled correctly, and almost every time he had the face of a terrified pup. But not at that moment. But its magic was gone as soon as Hiccup turned around to face Toothless. Or the ground. Or anything that wasn't Astrid. She couldn't help but notice the way his shoulders shrank back to their regular form. Even though he wasn't facing her, Astrid could see that he was looking down at the dirt. After a split second, Hiccup was himself again. "Okay," Astrid said before an uncomfortable silence managed to fall between them. "Then what do we do?" she asked. Hiccup sighed heavily, resting his weight against Toothless. I don't know," he muttered, not daring to look at her. Astrid guessed that Hiccup wasn't even aware that he was slowly petting the Night Fury with his palm. There was no trace of his previous determination in his voice. "Whatever I can think of is just. I can't think of any way to pull this off so everyone can be happy in the end," he admitted, lowering his voice in shame. "You can't please everyone around you, Hiccup," Astrid replied seriously. "You have to do what's right." "Right for who?" he snapped suddenly at her. "For the village." For my father." "For Toothless?" he asked, not hoping to receive a serious answer. However, Astrid wasn't a person that could have been talked down to. "What's right for you?" she replied. Hiccup only snorted at that and turned around to face her again. She saw it in his eyes that he was on the verge of laughing. "Well, that's a perfect plan, Astrid, why didn't I think of it earlier?" Hiccup countered with his usual dose of sarcasm. "I should have gone to my father the moment Toothless allowed me to touch him. I'm sure he would be on cloud 9 if I told him about it. Dad, guess what? I have wonderful news, we don't have to kill dragons. They can be very nice if given the chance." "Son, why didn't any of us think of it earlier?" Hiccup mocked Stoic's voice. "This will end the war we've been waging on ever since our ancestors arrived here." "Well done, son," Hiccup said, pacing back and forth in front of Astrid. The shield maiden rolled her eyes and grasped Hiccup by his shirt. Without saying anything, she hit him hard in the shoulder. The boy yelped. "Mock me again and I assure you that you won't be able to move your arm for at least a month," she warned him with a serious tone. Hiccup knew better than to put to the test Astrid's threats. "I'm trying to think of something, okay?" she asked, angry at Hiccup's mockery. "Besides, I didn't say that you should tell your father about Toothless," she added, looking at the Night Fury with reluctance in her eyes. The black dragon raised its head upon hearing its name. "But you should tell him about the nest, Hiccup," she said seriously. The small boy looked at her, still massaging a sore spot on his shoulder. "He won't believe me," Astrid, Hiccup said quietly. "He didn't believe when I claimed that I shot down the Night Fury, remember?" Astrid nodded her head in confirmation. "He won't believe me unless I have proof. And the only good proof would be him," he said, gesturing at Toothless, who was sitting patiently behind him. The black dragon was occupied with cleaning itself while the teens talked. "And I cannot risk Toothless being found," he admitted, returning to petting the Night Fury. He was rewarded with a low purr. "Why not?" Astrid asked, refusing to believe that Hiccup could have any doubts about revealing what they had found. "We have a chance to end the war, Hiccup." "End the war," she repeated, making sure that the boy in front of her heard what she was saying. "Think about it, Hiccup. Your mother was taken away during a dragon raid and you have a chance to make sure something like this never happens again to anyone. You have a chance to stop those bloody raids once and for all, something we've been trying to achieve for over 300 years, she exclaimed, not believing that she had to explain it to him. "Then why not?" she repeated her question, demanding an answer. "Because," he replied calmly, not looking at her. "Astrid, I know you won't understand it 'cause you're a warrior, but to me, Toothless isn't some mindless creature. He's my best friend," he admitted, gathering the courage to look at her. Just as before, Astrid just stared at him with wide eyes. I knew you wouldn't get it. So, if you're not going to tell your dad, then what are you going to do? Astrid asked, breaking the silence after a few moments. Figure out which side you're on. Astrid's words resonated in Hiccup's mind. I don't know yet, he replied. Just give me until tomorrow, he added quickly when he noticed Astrid was going to speak. I'll figure something out. Okay, she agreed. A moment later she punched Hiccup again at the same spot. The boy yelped again. That's for kidnapping me, she explained. Well, I'm sure I won't be able to use this arm for a month now, thanks, he commented sarcastically, massaging the sore spot. He tried to pull back when he noticed Astrid moving in his direction again. Although his efforts came to naught, considering that she was much more agile than he. She grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him closer towards her. But instead of another wave of pain he expected, Hiccup felt her lips on his cheek, even if only for a split second. That's for everything else, Astrid said, not looking him in the eye. Before Hiccup could formulate a response, the young shield maiden was already running towards the exit of the cove, leaving confused Hiccup behind. He could only watch her retreating form, though as soon as Astrid reached her destination, his senses returned to him. Astrid, he called out, causing her to stop. She turned around slowly. They can't know about Toothless, he pleaded her. He noticed Astrid struggling internally for a moment before he received a reply. They won't, she promised and left the cove. Hiccup sighed heavily. He sat down on the ground, right next to the small lake. Toothless was a few meters away from him, drinking from the pond. The scrawny boy found himself touching the spot where Astrid's lips came in contact with his skin. His lips curled up in a small smile. What am I supposed to do, bud? He asked his dragon, not hoping to receive any answer. Toothless growled lowly, though Hiccup could only guess what it was supposed to mean. I can't tell my dad about you, he wouldn't be too happy. He shared his thoughts with the only other living being in the cove. But on the other hand, can I allow him to continue his searching for the nest? He asked, once again not hoping to receive an answer. He's still my dad, you know, and if he finds what we have found. Thorsbeard, he can't go in there. That thing will kill him, he exclaimed, even though there was no one around. But he won't stop until he finds the nest or dies doing so, he added quickly. And my dad is a Viking, you know, the most stubborn one you could imagine, actually. He would never listen if I tried to tell him what I learned about the dragons, Hiccup said, massaging his temples. He groaned heavily, frustrated at the situation he found himself in. I mean, really, there's nothing I can do now, he said, admitting defeat. He began pacing back and forth across the cove again, trying to think of something that wouldn't result in risking Toothless' life. He would have continued on his pointless wandering if he didn't stumble upon something which resulted in him almost falling to the ground. He groaned out of annoyance and looked down to see what it was that he stumbled upon. Or, can I? He asked himself, kneeling next to the small object. It was his basket that he dragged along from the village when he decided it was best to leave. Perhaps all I need to do is figure out which side I'm on, he muttered to himself, recalling Astrid's words from a few days prior. He felt Toothless nudge him in the side. What do you say, bud? He asked the Night Fury. The dragon growled slightly, trying to reply to Hiccup. Maybe we should just do what's right for us, he wondered. It will be better this way, he added, rising up. So, what do you say, bud? He asked again, looking at Toothless. You wouldn't want to spend the rest of your life in this cove, would you? He added rhetorically, lifting up the basket and attaching it to the saddle. Toothless let out a roar that could only be interpreted as the roar of agreement. I thought so, Hiccup muttered to himself, pulling out a hooded vest from the basket. It was getting colder and colder. It wouldn't be long before the first snow falls. He put on the additional clothing. The scrawny boy double-checked the straps that were holding the saddle in one spot and made sure if the basket would stay in place. You're ready, bud? He asked his four-legged companion. The dragon roared in reply. Pity I can't understand what you're saying, Hiccup commented with a soft sigh. He mounted the Night Fury and once again double-checked everything. Toothless roared again, this time in something that sounded like an annoyance. Yeah, sorry, but Hiccup chuckled. Let's go, he commanded, and the black dragon took off, leaving the cove behind them. Hiccup congratulated himself mentally for putting on another layer of clothing, cause high in the skies it was even colder. He put on the hood and wrapped himself tightly with the vest. He cast one last glance at the island behind him that was getting smaller and smaller. Toothless Squirrel brought him out from his thoughts before he could even sink in them fully. "Wherever you want," Bud Hiccup replied, patting the Night Fury on its head. "Wherever you want." Chapter 1. 10 years later. Astrid swung her battle axe high above her head. She yelled as she charged at her opponent. "Not on my watch," she said to herself with determination and anger written all over her face. A red monstrous nightmare was chasing after a small group of children. Ignoring the soreness in her muscles, Astrid managed to force her legs to work even faster. The dragon has already cornered its prey, growling menacingly. Its hide was burning with fire, illuminating everything around it. Astrid noticed the look of terror on children's faces. She wasn't far away from her target. It was a matter of a few seconds before she reached the dragon and the terrified children. But a few seconds could prove to be too long. It seemed as if the world around her slowed down unnaturally. Astrid noticed that the nightmare was already preparing itself to breathe fire, threatening to instantly kill the young children. It didn't take her long to realize that she wouldn't manage to reach the dragon. Without slowing down, Astrid gripped her axe with both hands and lifted it high above her head. Letting out another battle roar, the young shield maiden straightened her arms and released her weapon, aiming it at the monstrous nightmare. Astrid thanked all the gods she knew when her axe found her target, literally in the last second stopping it from frying the small children. The strength behind the throw caused the monstrous nightmare's head to tilt in another direction, just as it released the deadly stream of fire. Astrid allowed herself to breathe a small sigh of relief when she noticed that the children were unharmed. Her small smile was quickly replaced with a look of dread when the nightmare turned its attention towards her and she was left without any weapon. Years of deadly training kicked in as the dragon breathed fire again, this time in her direction. Without wasting a split second on pointless thinking, Astrid rolled to the side, avoiding the deadly attack. She felt the heat of the fire on her skin as the flames passed her by mere millimeters. Once again she quickly thanked all the gods she knew. The young shield maiden quickly jumped back up on her feet, not risking to have her back turned towards the dragon even for a split second. Astrid anticipated the attack even before she saw that the dragon actually moved in her direction. She leaped back, avoiding Nightmare's fangs. Risking a glance to the sides, Astrid panic searched for some kind of weapon. Deep down she hoped for her axe to land somewhere near her. She cracked a smile when she noticed her beloved weapon lying on the ground, not more than 10 meters away from her. Mentally pushing the muscle soreness out of her mind, Astrid focused all of her efforts on reaching the blade. Knowing that it was then or never, she forced herself to run as fast as she could, right at the monstrous nightmare. Astrid bowed down, once again wanting to avoid being impaled by the dragon's fangs. And once again she was mere millimeters from being hit. She ran between the creature's legs, feeling the enormous heat radiating from its body. Her eyes were focused only on the axe that was lying right next to the nightmare's head. If someone asked her after the battle how she managed to dodge another attack, Astrid wouldn't be able to give any coherent reply. Maybe it was her training or the heat of battle, she didn't know. All she knew was that in the last second possible she got down on her knees, avoiding being hit by the dragon's tail. She slid through the last few meters on the ground, feeling the small stones cutting the skin on her knees. Astrid reached her weapon and lifted it, immediately turning around to face the dragon. The speed with which she turned around added strength to her attack. The dragon was also turning around, anticipating her moves. What it didn't anticipate, though, was the side swing made by Astrid. The creature had no time to react as the blade made the contact with the skin on its neck. The monstrous nightmare let out a terrible roar of pain as the blade embedded itself in its thin neck. Astrid tore away her weapon from the creature's neck. As a result, she was sprayed with the dragon's blood, though she seemed to not notice it. Taking another swing, Astrid brought her weapon down, striking the nightmare in the exact same spot as previously, cutting off its head and silencing it forever. The young shield maiden allowed herself to make a small smile of victory. She looked around, taking in her surroundings. Berk was burning, though for the past few years Astrid got used to this sight. Despite the raids becoming worse and worse with each time the dragons came, the Vikings of Berk were able to chase them away each time. This time proved to be no exception. Even though the death toll during each raid wasn't too high, the aftermath was much more tragic. With each raid, they were losing more and more of their livestock and the winter was almost upon them. And if the weather wasn't going to change, then they would have a harsh winter indeed. Astrid shook her head to get rid of the thoughts of the not-so-certain future and ran up to the small group of children who were about to become the nightmare's victims. She was relieved when she noticed that they were all right, although scared to death. She managed to smile at them when she kneeled right next to them. She wiped the dragon's blood from her face with the fur on her bracer. "It's all right," she tried to reassure the small children. "They are leaving already," she added, gesturing at the dragons who already got what they wanted and were leaving behind the burning Berk. The sunrise was already approaching, brightening the sky in the east. None of the 4 kids dared to move, though. "Come on, I'll take you to the Great Hall," Astrid offered, trying to sound as friendly as possible. The children looked at one another as if judging if the young shield maiden was trustworthy. "Everything will be fine, you'll see," she tried to reassure them once again. "Save it for yourself, Astrid." She heard a male voice behind her back. "Kids trust only the strongest of warriors." Snotlout, she acknowledged the man who was speaking to her. She turned around to face the young Viking. "It's good that you're here. All the terrible terrors are already killed?" she asked with sarcasm as clear as day in her voice. Her words had the desired effect as she noticed Snotlout's face turn red from anger and embarrassment. She knew that recalling the event from one of the past raids was a sensitive topic for the Stoics there. Snotlout snorted. "I know you're burning with jealousy, Astrid," he replied, flexing himself as much as possible. "We both know that only the best warrior can be chosen to be an heir," he said proudly. Astrid rolled her eyes. "The best, the most courageous, the bravest and the most handsome," he added, checking out his bicep. Astrid sighed heavily. Just as she thanked all the gods during her combat with the monstrous nightmare, now she was cursing all of them for being forced to live at the same time as Snotlout. Astrid wasn't stupid, she knew that Snotlout stood out from the other Vikings their age when it came to combat. Truth be told, it was never unequivocally settled who was a better warrior, Astrid or Snotlout, which led to him to boast about his fighting skills. But physical prowess wasn't the main factor that made someone a good chief material. But she had nothing to say in that matter. Snotlout was most closely related to Stoic's son and no one had any doubts that he was going to be chosen as the next heir after Hiccup's sudden disappearance. Even before it happened, many people on Berk said that Hiccup should be replaced by his cousin. Astrid felt her anger rising when she thought about the boy who's gone missing 10 years earlier. "Hiccup, I'm going to kill you if that dragon hadn't done it yet," she promised. "Give me until tomorrow," she recalled his last words and snorted. She was angry with Hiccup and she had every right to be. She didn't realize it before, but Hiccup was actually a much better chief material. In opposite to his cousin, Hiccup's brain wasn't that of a yak's size. He might have not inherited his father's physics, but Stoic didn't possess only brawn but also a brain. And she was more than sure that Hiccup inherited the second trait from his father. Besides, no matter how skinny he was, it wasn't impossible for him to gain some mass in the future. But she guessed she would never find out if it was the truth. "And the most arrogant, short-sighted and big-headed," Astrid added in reply to Snotlout's words. This caused the Jorgensens' anger to rise again. "I'd watch my mouth if I were you," Snotlout warned her. "As soon as we're married, I will teach you to show me respect," he threatened. Astrid shuddered, even though she tried not to show it. It was another reason why she was angry with Hiccup. His disappearance put Snotlout on the highest position in Berk, second only to Stoic, though that would change in a few years and she was well aware of it. The result was that Snotlout had the first pick when it came to choosing a wife and he chose Astrid without having second thoughts about it. She could have delayed it for as long as she did, but she couldn't do it on and on. She didn't come from a wealthy family and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't repel Snotlout's proposal with no end. She was clever enough to know that marriage with Berk's future chief would give her family position and protection. But that didn't mean she had to like it. In fact, she tried to avoid marrying Snotlout to the point where she even asked Fishlegs, and even Toughnut to propose to her, but they both had refused. Snotlout has made it clear that if anyone dares to claim Astrid for himself, the consequences would be horrifying. He even threatened that whoever would be as reckless as to propose to his chosen one would be executed in the most painful way one could only imagine. The threat of being put under the Blood Eagle scared everyone off. "I promise to you, as soon as we are married, you'll regret the day when you first saw me," Astrid warned in reply. She wouldn't enter the marriage with that man peacefully. "I'll make you regret that for the rest of your life," she added, clenching her teeth. Snotlout paled visibly and took a step backward. "Stoic ordered everyone to gather in the Great Hall," he said, changing the topic. Snotlout wasn't the most clever person, but he also wasn't the most stupid one. He knew that Astrid never made an idle threat. "Of course he did," Astrid replied, rolling her eyes. "He always does after a raid," she added. Snotlout coughed a few times before heading in the direction of the Great Hall. He didn't say a word, and Astrid was grateful for that. His mere presence caused her blood to boil, and she knew that if their conversation continued, Snotlout would be entering the Great Hall with a new injury. The young shield maiden sighed heavily. She turned around to face the children again. This time they were more willing to comply and followed her to the Great Hall without a word. She was panting heavily when they reached their destination. The all-night-long fight had its effect on her. Astrid pushed the heavy doors just to find almost the entire village inside already. She chased away the children that she led, telling them to find their families, and approached the center of the hall. Stoic was already standing at the table that surrounded the hearth. Astrid could hear the chief's powerful voice, though she couldn't make out the words. The young shield maiden made her way to the center of the hall, pushing aside other villagers who were standing between her and her target. As soon as she reached the table, she noticed a large map of the area that surrounded Berk spread on it. Just as it always happened after the raid, Stoic tried to put the other villagers to find the dragon's nest. But as time passed and every search came to naught, people have begun losing hope and were more and more reluctant to go with their chief. "We have no other way," Stoic said, looking around, trying to find those who would see a reason behind his words. "Their attacks have gotten worse than ever. We still have 2 weeks before the winter begins, and we've already lost half of our livestock. If things won't change, this will be the last winter we will ever see. We have to find their nest and destroy it." "I know where is the nest," Astrid thought, driven by guilt, though she never dared to say these words out loud. If she did, she'd have to explain how she knew it, and she couldn't explain without mentioning Hiccup and the Night Fury. "I promised it to him," she reminded herself, even though she already began to question the righteousness of her promise. After all, Hiccup also didn't keep his promise. He ran away instead of figuring something out. But this would never be a reason for Astrid to withdraw from her promise. "We've been trying to find their nest for 300 years already," someone from the hall replied. "And every expedition was in vain. We'll only keep losing ships and men if we sail there again." Many of the villagers murmured their approval to these words. "We can't just keep sending our warriors into the unknown, knowing that we won't find that nest." "Then what do you suggest we do?" Stoic sighed, massaging his temples. Astrid noticed that Stoic was all covered in blood and dirt after the raid. "Johan told us about the Dreki tribe," the same person replied, earning another wave of whispers from everyone that was gathered in the Great Hall. Astrid noticed that Stoic clenched his teeth at the mere mention of the tribe that supposedly domesticated the dragons. Astrid had a feeling that she knew who might be hiding in there, but she wasn't going to say it out loud. Over the past few years, it was commonly accepted as a fact that Hiccup was carried away by the dragon. It put him on some sort of a pedestal amongst the villagers, and she wasn't going to destroy their belief. And she guessed that Stoic wouldn't take it lightly if he found out that his son befriended their greatest enemy. "I will never go as low as to speak to any of them," Stoic replied, and also received a wave of muttered approvals. "They are the traitors to every Viking in the archipelago," he added, and the whispers turned into yells of agreement. "I'm not saying that we should make peace with them. But they have found a way to live with them. Perhaps they also know how to defeat them," the man from the crowd said. He also gathered a response in the form of the collective nods and whispers of agreement. "We can try to get them to cooperate, and if they agree and our problem is solved, we can just get rid of them and pay them back for fraternizing with the enemy," he offered, and the majority of the Vikings yelled in agreement. Even some of the Stoics' closest and most dedicated followers saw this as a good idea. The chief sighed heavily and rubbed his eyes. If that doesn't work out, we can return to our old ways and continue searching for the nest, the same man added quickly. But trying something new wouldn't hurt. His words had the desired effect, as almost every man and a woman gathered in the great hall expressed their agreement in the form of loud shouts. Stoic sighed heavily again, knowing that he had no other option but to agree. If we were to give this idea a shot, we must set out now. It won't be long before the ice binds the waters and we will be trapped here for the entirety of winter. But we also can't take a big group, Stoic said after a moment of thinking. The raids won't stop and we can't leave the village undefended. Spitaloot, he addressed Snotlout's father. You will act as the chief in time of my absence. The man only nodded in agreement. I will take a few of the younger warriors with me. I will gladly kill every single one of those traitors, Snotlout interjected, clenching his fist. Astrid only rolled her eyes and she saw Stoic do the same thing. Snotlout, Astrid, Fishlegs, Roughnut, and Toughnut will come with me, Stoic decided, agreeing to the Vikings' plan. The warriors that he appointed nodded their heads collectively. We'll set out tomorrow morning and find that Dreeky tribe. Go get some rest and meet me at the docks at dawn, he ordered, and once again received a collective nod as a reply. It's settled then, he announced. Return to your homes and repair them. We must prepare for the winter no matter what, he ordered, and the Vikings began to disperse, leaving the great hall one by one. Some of them remained inside, opting for an early breakfast. Astrid leaned against the table and sighed heavily. She couldn't wait to wash herself and hop into bed. She was sure that she deserved some rest after that night. Her daydreaming was interrupted, though, when she felt an arm around her shoulder. She didn't have to open her eyes to know who it was. Guess we'll be spending some time together, Snotlout said. Astrid only sighed heavily, not bothering to reply. I know that you must be excited at the very thought of it. Astrid was too tired to even remove his hand from her shoulder. I know that Stoic is doing what he thinks is right for the village, but as soon as it is over, I will behead each and every one of those filthy traitors. Guess that it will serve as a nice decoration during our wedding, don't you think? He asked, and suddenly Astrid pictured Hiccup's head on a spike, right next to the Night Fury's head. Undoubtedly, she murmured, and gathered strength she needed to twist Snotlout's arm in a very painful way. The Berkshire let out a rather girly squeal. But lay your hand on me again and I swear you'll become handicapped, she warned, and stormed out of the great hall, heading straight towards her family home. She reached it quickly and ran up the stairs, heading straight for her room. She pushed the wooden doors open and threw herself on the bed, gladly accepting the comfort that it gave her. All thoughts of bath left her mind. It didn't take long before she fell asleep, though she didn't get much rest as her dreams were filled with the images of Hiccup's head on a spike during her wedding with Snotlout. Chapter 2. Astrid was at the docks at the appointed time, though she was the first one of the group that Stoic had chosen. She slept for the majority of the previous day, though sleep didn't bring the rest she thought it would. Her dreams were filled with one image: Hiccup's head on a spike while she was being married off to Snotlout. Astrid shuddered slightly, more from disgust than cold. After waking up, she washed herself quickly, cleaning the dried dragon blood and dust that remained on her after the raid. Then she swiftly packed the essentials she knew she would need on the journey: a blanket, a warm cloak, some small tools that would ease survival in the wild, and her axe. She fitted everything in one bag that she was carrying on her shoulder, except for the cloak. She put it on herself as soon as she left her home. The first snow was already falling on the ground, slowly burying everything beneath a thin layer of the white flue. Astrid sighed heavily. If it wasn't the fire that surrounded her village, it was snow. She didn't bother herself with long goodbyes with her parents. She still held a small grudge against them for giving her no, selling her to Snotlout. She grabbed something small to eat that was on a table and left her home, slamming the wooden doors behind her. Astrid rearranged the hood of her cloak that nearly slipped from her head. The falling snow was getting thicker and thicker with every minute she spent on the docks, meaning that the villagers would have to clear it off if they were to proceed with their daily tasks. She also wrapped herself more tightly with her cloak. The cold breeze from the sea was capable of penetrating nearly everything. It wasn't long before she was joined by Gobber, who came hobbling to the docks. His wooden prosthetics that he had instead of his right leg was making it hard for him to walk. But despite his handicap, Gobber was one of the best warriors on Berk, which is why Astrid held him in such high regard. The old smith was capable of overcoming an obstacle that surely would have had other men retired if not even killed. She greeted him with a subtle nod of her head that was returned by him. He said something about speaking to Stoic right after the meeting and convincing him that he should go as well, though Astrid wasn't fully listening to the old smith. Not long after Gobber, Fishlegs, and the twins arrived, each of them was carrying their own bag. Small greetings were exchanged, but no one was in a mood to talk. The current weather wasn't a good sign and they all were well aware of it. Even the twins were unusually quiet. The last one to arrive was Stoic, followed closely by Snotlout, who seemed to be the most enthusiastic about the upcoming journey. The chief acknowledged everyone who came and ordered to come on board of the boat. Snotlout greeted Astrid with his usual "Hey, babe," and tried to throw his arm around her shoulders, though a quick elbow into the ribs from her side quickly made the Berkshire realize that it wasn't the best idea. From what Trader Johan said, the Dreki tribe is 7 days of voyage from Berk, southeast, Stoic said. His loud voice was capable of getting through the growing snowstorm. "We have to do it as fast as possible, or we will be trapped away from Berk for winter," he added, looking everyone at a time into their eyes. The small group of Vikings nodded their heads in agreement. "I'm going to say it once and I don't want to be forced to repeat myself. Do not say or do anything stupid. In fact, it will be better if none of you speaks at all. I will do the talking." "And why is that?" Snotlout asked, sounding offended. "These people have befriended dragons," Stoic explained, not believing that he actually had to do it. "They must be Loki's brood and they most likely know witchcraft. They might put a spell on us if we're not careful." This reply seemed to satisfy the other Vikings, though Astrid hardly managed to keep a smile from gracing her lips. She couldn't help but picture Hiccup trying to somehow put a spell on them. Whoever those people who were riding dragons were, they seemed less intimidating after what Astrid just saw in her mind. Stoic gave a sign to Gobber and they set sail, leaving Berk behind. Astrid watched for a little longer as the lonely island was becoming smaller and smaller with every minute. There was one upside of the falling snow: it meant that there was also wind. Gods must have been on their side because the wind was blowing in the direction that was their destination. Astrid thanked silently that they didn't have to row, at least for now. If there was even the smallest trace that Astrid was in a good mood, it faded quickly away when she saw who decided to grace her with his presence. "Hey, babe." Astrid sighed heavily, clenching tightly her fists. It was going to be a long week indeed. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup soared through the sky, urging Toothless to go as fast as possible, while at the same time allowing his few companions to keep up with him. He loved flying, he really did, but spending an entire week in the saddle could cause everyone to be fed up with it. He missed home, he missed a warm bed, he missed proper meals, and he missed a warm bath. But most of all, he missed his little girl Zephyr. He couldn't help but smile beneath his helmet at the thought. He kept repeating himself that he wasn't clingy, but he, and the rest of his tribe, knew that he'd been only lying to himself. He couldn't be blamed, though. There wasn't a single person in the Dreki tribe who wasn't completely in love with her. Their island was already visible at the horizon. It would take them an hour at best to reach their home. Hiccup's grin widened, though it remained hidden from everyone. "We're almost there, but," he shouted at Toothless, hoping that his voice wouldn't be suppressed by his helmet and the wind. The Night Fury roared happily. Hiccup laughed slightly and petted the dragon on its head. He twisted his head to face the other riders who accompanied him. He nodded at them, signaling that they were close. They returned the gesture, not bothering to try to say anything. Hiccup looked at the back of the saddle to check if the cargo was secured. Behind him, tied up and gagged, was lying Dagur, still trying to free himself from the ropes that were tightly bound around his wrists and ankles. He was struggling against his ties, mumbling incoherent words. Hiccup laughed slightly at that. "Don't worry, Dagur, we'll soon reach Dreki," he said, trying to do his best to be heard by the Berserker leader. The man stopped kicking and stared at him with wide eyes. "What? Isn't this what you've always wanted? You've tried so many times to enter our village and now you will be carried into it," Hiccup said sarcastically. They were getting closer and closer to Driki. Hiccup urged Toothless to go even faster, not bothering to wait for his companions. They were so close to the village that they would surely reach it without his aid. And the closer he was to his home, the more intense his longing was becoming. He landed with grace on the cliff. The villagers stepped aside after hearing the Night Fury's wings beating in the air. Hiccup jumped off of the saddle, sighing heavily. Both he and Toothless were happy to finally be on the ground. Soon, other riders landed right next to him. Hiccup didn't have to wait too long for Eret to greet him. "Hiccup," he exclaimed, stretching his arms as if he wanted to embrace the Night Fury's rider. "Eret, son of Eret," Hiccup replied in the same friendly manner, although a subtle dose of sarcasm could be heard in his voice. "It's good to finally be back home. We've been chasing Dager and his men far to the north. We were caught by the snowstorm on the way. Winter is coming hard on us." "And how the repairs have been going?" he asked. Eret scowled at the mention. He still wasn't too fond of the fact that he had to remain behind. "Slow, as you could have guessed," Eret replied. Hiccup looked around and noticed that some of the buildings were still in a deplorable condition. "I hope that at least you've had some luck," he asked, looking over Hiccup's shoulder to look at Toothless' saddle. "I had indeed," Hiccup confirmed, returning to Toothless. He grabbed Dager with both of his hands and dragged him off of the saddle. He threw him unceremoniously on the ground. The Berserker leader hit it with a soft thud. "He wasn't too happy that we dragged him here," he added, looking at the man who was responsible for all the damages done to Driki. Heather approached them after making sure that her razor whip Winshire received its well-deserved portion of fish. Toothless looked with jealousy in his eyes at the other dragon, also wanting to eat after a long journey, though Hiccup seemed to not notice it. "What shall we do to him?" the black-haired girl asked, pointing her sword right at Dager's neck. The man tried to back away from the steel that looked to be too sharp for him to want to touch it. Hiccup looked at the man who used to spread panic across his village more than once. He was the chief, but the decision belonged to everyone. After all, everyone suffered because of Dager. "He will be put under trial," Hiccup declared after a moment of hesitation. He felt Toothless pat him on the head with his tail. "We will judge him and sentence him accordingly to his crimes." Speaking of, Eret interjected, focusing Hiccup's attention back on himself. Toothless this time nudged his rider with his snout. Hiccup once again ignored his dragon. "There was a small nuance while you've been gone," he said, scratching the back of his head. Hiccup looked at his second in command. He took off his helmet, looking him straight in the eyes. "What? Another dragon killers?" Hiccup asked, rolling his eyes in annoyance. "Those guys seem to be coming out of nowhere. We deal with one of them and then two others appear in its spot." "Not now, Toothless," he said, addressing his dragon. The Night Fury kept patting its rider on the back. "Thorsbeard, a week ago we were attacked by Dager and his berserkers. I've been away for only 7 days and someone new came already." "Well, it wasn't the same attack we've grown used to," Eret admitted, searching for proper words to describe what had happened. "We were attacked by a single Viking boat. There were 7 Vikings on board, to be precise," he said finally, looking Hiccup straight in the eye. This caught the young man's attention. "Vikings coming in on us with just 1 boat? And in such small numbers?" he asked with disbelief. "What were they hoping to achieve here?" "Well, we weren't directly attacked," Eret cleared out. "One of our scouts, Havara, was attacked when he was patrolling the area around the island. Luckily, Kami and I were nearby to come to his rescue. He's alright, only bruised a little, though it's nothing that can't be cured. His dragon also wasn't hurt seriously." "What have you done to the invaders?" Hiccup asked, once again brushing off Toothless' tail of his shoulder. The dragon mumbled slightly in annoyance. A moment later Hiccup was swept off his feet by his Night Fury. "What do you want?" he asked after getting up, finally paying attention to his dragon. Toothless roared while gesturing with his head at Winshire, who was still eating fish. "Well, then go get them, you don't need my permission," Hiccup replied, annoyed by Toothless' behavior. "I swear, sometimes he can be worse than small children," he muttered under his nose. As if in contradiction to his words, Hiccup was once again forced to the ground by a small bundle with a mop of auburn hair on top of it that came crushing at him with surprising strength. The air was forced out of his lungs when he hit the ground with his back. "Daddy!" the small girl in his arms exclaimed happily. Hiccup couldn't help but smile at that. No matter what she would do, Zephyr always managed to bring a smile onto his face. "Hey there, little girl," she greeted her, hugging her tightly. The small girl in his arms returned the hug with as much strength as she could muster. Dager grunted something from his spot on the ground, though it fell on deaf ears and he had to reassume the uncomfortable position when Heather readjusted her sword that was still pressed tightly to his neck. "Sorry, I've tried to hold her, but when she heard Toothless approaching, she immediately stormed off of the house." Hiccup heard from above him. Kamikaze ran up to them, panting slightly. She was eyeing the little girl that Hiccup was hugging tightly. "I can't believe how fast she can be," she commented, catching her breath. "Now you know why I named her like that," Hiccup replied, laughing slightly. He lifted his daughter and placed her on the ground in order to stand up. He gladly accepted Iret's outstretched hand and thanked him. "Sometimes I wonder that one day she might be even faster than Toothless," he chuckled, ruffling Zephyr's hair. The girl smiled in the reply at the affectionate gesture. She quickly lifted both of her hands in a silent request. Hiccup rolled his eyes at that but complied nonetheless, picking up the small girl. "So, what have you done to those invaders?" he asked, addressing Iret as he remembered the recent topic of their talk. The grin from the man's face quickly faded away and he once again adopted a serious pose. "Nothing, yet," he replied. "We've been waiting for your return. Right now they are locked up in prison and disarmed. They've been told to await punishment." Thorsbeard Hiccup mumbled, rolling his eyes. "And here I thought that dealing with Dager was my only obligation for today," he commented with a heavy sigh. "And who are those guests of ours? Outcasts? Or maybe some Berserker survivors?" he queried, looking at Iret. "None," the ex-dragon trapper replied. "Those ones came from Berk," he said. All color left Hiccup's face when he heard what Iret said. Berk. He hadn't been there for 10 years and he didn't have any pangs of conscience about that. He stopped swaying his daughter in his arms and just watched the man in front of him. "What are they doing here?" he asked. The mere mentioning of his old village caused him to lose all of his self-confidence. For the first time in a few years, he stuttered. "They said something about asking for help," Cammy replied, answering Hiccup's question. "Nice asking for help if I did say so myself. Havara has almost been killed alongside his dragon." Hiccup sighed heavily. After a moment he put Zephyr back on the ground as he felt the ground beneath him spin. The little girl made a small noise of complaint, though it fell on Hiccup's deaf ears. The young man massaged his eyes, once again sighing heavily. He certainly didn't expect that. But nothing was lost yet. "Did our guests introduce themselves?" he asked. "No," Iret replied without a moment of hesitation. "In fact, we haven't asked them, to be honest," he added after a moment. "I'll deal with them right after we're done with Dager," Hiccup said after pulling himself together. "Did they say why they needed our help?" "They mumbled something about the problem with dragons," Iret replied, scratching the back of his head. "And then they immediately began to call us traitors and sorcerers for fraternizing the greatest enemy of all Vikings. So we quickly shut their mouths," he explained, cracking a small smile. "I could use a drink," Hiccup murmured to himself. "Well, good, you've said that because we've got some happy news as well," Iret said. This time the small smile had turned into a full grin from ear to ear. "We're getting married," he announced, embracing Kamikaze, who blushed deeply. This announcement caused Hiccup to forget what he's just heard about the newly arrived Vikings. Finally he commented, smiling from ear to ear. "You've been stealing upon each other for far too long," he added. Iret laughed at that. "I know, right," he replied with a small laugh. "I guess that last battle with Dager was the final push. She's been denying me for far too long," he added and once again burst out laughing. Hiccup smiled at that. Kamikaze only blushed even more. "So, when do you want to get married?" Hiccup asked, washing his hands in invisible soap. "We were talking about the winter," Iret said after a moment of wondering. "No point in waiting," he explained. "Well, that could be arranged," Hiccup replied after thinking for a while. "I mean, we have more supplies for the winter than we could possibly need, then why not?" I'm sure people will be happy when they hear that an additional feast is around the corner, he joked, laughing slightly. Speaking of people, Eret interjected. Hiccup had a feeling that he wasn't going to like what the ex-dragon trapper was going to say. Many of the villagers have been wondering when you would finally get married. Hiccup was right. He didn't like what Eret said. Driki could use a chiefess, you know. And it would do you some good as well, he added. Hiccup rolled his eyes at the comment. Don't even start, Eret, please, he replied, shaking his head in disbelief. They've been discussing this topic countless times already. Oh come on, Hiccup, you know I'm right, Eret replied, also shaking his head. Hiccup was much more stubborn than any of the Driki's inhabitants. Besides, think of it. I'm going to have a wife, and me being a chief would be an idea the villagers would look favorably at, he said, smiling cheekily. Hiccup rolled his eyes and shook his head again, though he couldn't help the small smile from finding its way onto his lips. Only if you finally beat me, Eret, he replied teasingly with a small laugh. Oh come on, we both know that I would have beaten you long ago if I hadn't been giving you a head start each time, Eret replied with the same small smile. Hiccup snorted at that. Yeah, right. I bet this is what you're telling yourself after every Snoggletog so you can sleep at night, right? Hiccup teased him with a smile of his own. Eret laughed humorlessly at that. Do you want me to finally start treating you seriously, he threatened, though there was no real threat behind his words. Well, Snoggletog is just around the corner, so we will have a perfect opportunity to find out, Hiccup countered, not willing to back away from the slightly taller man. I must disappoint you, Hiccup, but this Snoggletog I'm going to spend snogging with my beautiful wife, Eret replied. You're chickening out, Eret, Hiccup said, laughing slightly. The ex-dragon trapper laughed as well. Heather and Kamikaze, who have been listening to their conversation, shook their heads simultaneously and muttered something about boys being boys. All right, let's go deal with Dager and those Burkians, Hiccup ordered, clasping his hands. I wasn't joking when I said I could use a drink, and the sooner we're done with them, the sooner I'll be able to drink some ale. Chapter 3. Hiccup was sitting right in the middle of the main table in the Great Hall. To his right, Eret was sitting with Kamikaze right next to him. To the chief's left, there was Heather, who was twiddling a dagger as she usually did. The four of them were wearing their distinguishing outfits, made of their dragon's scales. Hiccup was covered from head to toes with black armor that had some red markings in a few spots. He even was wearing his helmet, making his eyes the only part of his body visible to others. Toothless was sitting loyally behind him, while Zephyr was sitting on Hiccup's lap. Eret, Kamikaze and Heather had similar armors, the only difference was their colors. They had green, red and grey armors respectively and weren't wearing helmets. Their dragons were also sitting behind their backs. The entire Great Hall was filled with Vikings and dragons who were standing or sitting at the walls, watching carefully the scene that was taking place at the center. Many of them were shouting angrily, and some of the dragons were even roaring from time to time. The target of their hatred was Dager, who was kneeling in front of the table at which Hiccup sat. The young chief was absorbed in his thoughts as he was eyeing the former leader of the Berserkers. He was resting his head on his hand, careful not to crush the small girl who was sitting on his lap. Zephyr couldn't help yawning loudly, though compared to the noise in the Great Hall, it was almost unnoticeable. Hiccup sighed heavily. This was the difficult part of being the chief, delivering justice. Especially when all of his people wanted only one thing for the man who was kneeling in front of him. You know what has to be done, Eret whispered to him, though his words forced their way through the angry yells, shouts, and roars. He made us suffer 3 times already, and many of our people were hurt by him before, he said. Hiccup closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he was staring at his daughter that he was embracing with one hand. He nodded his head once, agreeing with Eret's words. One can only take so much. Mercy is not an option, he added, leaning back into his chair, hoping that his chief knew what he was implying. Hiccup sighed heavily and handed his daughter to Heather, who gladly accepted the little girl and put away her knife. Zephyr seemed to not notice the change in her surroundings and just snuggled against the black-haired woman. Heather smiled at that. The chief of Driki pushed the chair that he was sitting on away from the table and stood up. These actions caused everyone to go silent almost instantly. Hiccup walked around the table towards Dager, whose head was bowed. The Berserker leader had his eyes glued to the floor and didn't move a single muscle when Hiccup approached him. The chief crouched down in front of him and observed his prisoner for a moment. Dager's jagged, ginger beard seemed to be even more of a mess than before, if that was even possible. The same thing went for his hair. They were sticking out in every direction, still tangled and dirty from the recent battle, even though it has already been a week. Exhaustion was written all over his face. His skin was unnaturally pale and his cheeks were collapsed. Even his eyes seemed to have become discolored. The only two things that remained unchanged in his appearance was a tattoo over his left eye and a large scar that started at the top of his forehead, crossed the right eye and ended right above his beard. "Do you know why you are here?" Hiccup asked. He thought that his words would come out as a whisper, though in a deathly silence that took hold of the Great Hall they seemed to be just as loud as the Night Fury's roar. Dager snorted at that, and for the first time that day, he looked him straight in the eye. "Because you weren't capable of killing me on the battlefield," he replied cockily. A smirk of contempt was gracing his features. Hiccup clenched his fists at that. "You are here to answer for your numerous crimes against the people of Driki," he replied. Dager laughed slightly. "And what are you going to do to me?" he asked, still chuckling. "Lecture me about how the dragons are amazing and kind creatures. How it's pointless to wage war against one another. How terrifying it is to kill," he asked, shaking his head. Hiccup felt his anger rising slowly. "No," he replied, straightening himself. Dager followed his movements with his eyes. "I will not do the same mistake again," he added. Dager laughed again. "Then what? Exile me. Let me remind you that I'm not a member of your tribe and I don't take orders from you," he chuckled again. Hiccup smiled humorlessly beneath his helmet. "No," he replied, shaking slowly his head. "That is not the price you must pay. We both know you don't have the guts to kill me," Dager countered, meeting Hiccup's gaze with the firm look of his own. "You're right, I won't kill you, that would be too simple and too merciful for you," Hiccup replied, assured of what his verdict had to be. He kneeled again in order to be at the same height as Dager. "Did you really believe I could ever forgive you? For threatening to kill my family and attempting to destroy my home?" Hiccup asked rhetorically, not waiting to receive an answer before speaking again. "For everything you've done to us, you will have a blood eagle drawn on your back," he whispered the last few words, though they were heard by everyone who was gathered in the Great Hall. Hiccup earned a few shocked gasps from the crowd, though he ignored all of them. He felt Iret's intense gaze on himself. Dager burst out laughing after hearing Hiccup's sentence. He looked around, observing the reaction of the people who were gathered in the Great Hall. His smile began to fade away slowly when he noticed that everyone had serious and even terrified expressions on their faces. He reluctantly looked back at Hiccup, seeing nothing but a pair of unforgiving green eyes. "No," Dager coughed up, looking him straight in the eyes. He chuckled slightly again, though where amusement used to be, fear began to take its place. He blinked a few times and once again turned away his gaze from Hiccup as if in a futile attempt to not allow his words to sink in. "And your ribcage," Hiccup said through clenched teeth. "Will spring apart," he finished, making sure to say each word slowly and clearly. Everyone in the Great Hall held their breaths, afraid to make even the smallest sound. Even the dragons were silent. Dager shook his head again. "No," he begged, though that one word came out as a stutter. Hiccup couldn't remember the time when he saw the Berserker leader so afraid. "No," Dager repeated, once again looking him in the eyes. Hiccup saw begging and fear in Dager's gaze, though they were met with nothing but a cold determination from his side. "Yes," he whispered back and straightened himself. Dager once again followed his movements with his eyes that were filled with fear. Hiccup was towering above him and never before had the Berserker leader found the young man so terrifying. Like wings, Hiccup finished and found with his eyes the two men who carried Dager into the Great Hall. He nodded at them. Dager felt two pairs of strong hands lift him from the ground, though he paid them no mind. Soon the Great Hall of Driki was once again filled with shouts and yells directed at him, though he couldn't make out a single word. He could only watch with disbelief and fear as Hiccup was returning to his place at the table, his back turned to him. Dager noticed the man, who was sitting to Hiccup's right, say something to him, but he didn't understand a single thing due to the noise and the fact that he was almost entirely dragged out from the Great Hall. The last thing he saw was the same pair of green, unforgiving eyes that shone brightly against the blackness of Hiccup's armor. Then, the doors to the great hall were closed and he was dragged to prison, though he couldn't remember the route to it, even if his life depended on it. Underscore 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 underscore. Astrid and the other Vikings from Berk heard the doors to the prison being opened, and soon, 2 men came in, dragging the 3rd man between them. The young shield maiden watched as the 2 Vikings opened one of the cages and unceremoniously threw the 3rd man inside. The new prisoner hit the ground hard, though he barely seemed to notice. Even though the interior of the prison was nearly completely dark, Astrid managed to take a glimpse at the man's face. She gasped slightly. Never before had she seen someone look so terrified. "Get up," one of the 2 Vikings barked at Astrid and her companions. "Our chief is back," he added with a small smile. The Berkians did as they were told and stood up. Normally, 2 warriors wouldn't be enough to control them, but Astrid and the rest had their hands bound behind their backs and their legs were connected with a heavy chain. There was no way they could fight like that. Even Stoic the Vast didn't bother himself with the pointless effort of trying to escape. There was no way they could run away from the dragons. The small group from Berk followed 2 guards without a single word. Astrid couldn't help but close her eyes when they left the prison. After spending a few days in the dark, the sunlight was too much for her and for the others to handle. It took them a while, but soon all of them got used to the brightness of the day once again. Their walk was heavy and they marched in silence. The 2 guards weren't even speaking to each other. Astrid used that time to get to know their surroundings a little. The village seemed to be vast at a first glance, though after closer inspection, Astrid realized that it was due to the fact that there was a lot of space between the buildings, unlike on Berk. She also noticed that the majority of the buildings were destroyed. Right behind the last of the houses, the forest began, too dense for Astrid to see anything in it. She looked around, directing her gaze beyond the buildings, and realized that they were high above the sea level with no visible way down to the seashore. She managed to keep a sigh from escaping her lips. If they somehow succeeded in a prison break, they wouldn't be able to leave the island. After all, why would the dragons need docks anyway? She asked herself with a small chuckle that went unnoticed by the 2 guards who were escorting them. They were approaching the nearest big mountain with wooden doors right in the center of it. It has to be their great hall, Astrid realized. She and her companions looked up in silent awe as they stared at the entrance that was twice as tall as the one on Berk. However, it didn't have the impressive monuments that would guard the doors like the great hall on their island had. The group of Vikings followed the 2 guards upstairs, though their climb was made difficult by the chains that connected their legs. It didn't take Astrid long to hear Gobber and Fishlegs panting slightly. She would only lie to herself if she said she wasn't afraid. Only gods knew what would be waiting for them behind those doors. They were exhausted after 7 days of voyage and a few days of imprisonment, unarmed and undoubtedly outnumbered. Not to mention the dragons. Astrid lifted her eyes, seeking some sort of comfort in a huge form of her chief. The only thing she found was silence as she stared at Stoic's back. They soon reached the top of the stone stairs. The 2 guards pushed the heavy wooden doors. Astrid was surprised at how easily they could be opened, but she had no time to admire that because their entire group was shoved inside unceremoniously. She cursed slightly under her breath when Snotlout lost his footing and fell to the ground, hitting it hard. The result was that he pulled everyone else to the ground with him. Even Stoic didn't manage to stand and they all were lying on the ground. They quickly got up, though, when they all heard an unmistakable shriek above their heads. Dragon Stoic murmured and quickly stood up, followed by his Vikings. The chief of Berk instinctively reached out his hand to his belt, hoping to find his hammer there. His palm met nothing but air, but that didn't stop the experienced dragon killer. He tried to charge at a deadly Nada with his bare fists. As a result, he pulled the rest of his group, though it seemed he didn't notice that the adrenaline giving him a sudden boost of strength. The Vikings from Berk did their best to keep up with their chief and also charged at their deadly enemy. It seemed that the guards who were escorting them anticipated their movements because they stepped between them and the dragon almost immediately. Their weapons were raised and pointed at them, effectively stopping the group from Burke from doing what they intended to do. Astrid looked around and noticed that other people who were gathered in the Great Hall also approached them with their weapons high in their hands. In their eyes, she saw nothing but hatred and contempt directed at them. "Our chief wants to speak with you," one of the guards said, lowering his sword that until this moment was dangerously close to Stoic's neck. The red-haired man looked down at him, but the guard didn't make a single move that would indicate that Stoic scared him. "And I would suggest you remember about the good manners," he added mockingly, and backed away, allowing them to go further inside. Stoic followed him with a hateful gaze, but he complied nonetheless. He breathed out the air angrily and walked deeper into the Great Hall. The other guards also lowered their weapons and allowed the 7 newcomers to follow their chief. When the doors were closed behind them and her eyes adjusted to the darkness that dominated in the Great Hall, Astrid noticed that it was just as huge as its entrance. They were walking right through the middle of the dimly lit room and passed a round large table with an opening in the middle of it, similar to the one they had in Burke. But no fire was burning in the hearth. Soon they came to a halt and were forced down on their knees by the guards who were still escorting them. Astrid let out a hiss that was filled with a combination of pain and anger. After calming down her breath, she looked up. In front of them, on a wooden platform, 4 people were sitting at the table. 5. Astrid corrected herself when she noticed a small child on the lap of one of the 4 adults. She couldn't help but immediately notice the odd armors that the 4 of them were wearing. It looked similar to the scale armor she saw a few times in her life, but there was no way that those scales were made out of metal. They glittered with different shades of colors and were arranged randomly, indicating that whoever made them wasn't the best in making armor designs. 3 people who were sitting right in front of them had their faces exposed, 2 women and 1 man. The man was whispering something to the 4th person who had a helmet on his head. The black-haired man was looking at them occasionally and then his eyes would return to the person he was talking to. Astrid couldn't understand a single word, though, even if they were not more than a few meters away from them. The Great Hall was filled with shouts and roars that she's just grown aware of. Suddenly, one roar broke through every other noise in the Great Hall. The sound was almost deafening and it managed to freeze the Vikings' blood. They haven't heard that sound for around 10 years, though they could never forget it. Is that a Night Fury? Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup watched closely as his men brought in the prisoners to the Great Hall and he could swear he paled beneath his helmet. At the front of the group of hostages was his father Stoic the Vast, the chief of Burke. Hiccup breathed heavily. His father hasn't changed a bit since the last time he saw him. Maybe except for a few strands of grey hair that could be seen on top of his head and in his beard, but nothing more than that. He could still maintain his intimidating posture even while being a prisoner. The next person Hiccup noticed was Gobber. He couldn't help but smile slightly upon noticing his old mentor. The only difference he saw in him was the fact that his walk was much heavier than it used to be. But from what he could see, he was still his old self. Snotlout, Rough Nut, Tough Nut, and Fish Legs didn't change much in Hiccup's opinion. Of course, it was visible that they all got older for the past 10 years, but none of them had changed to the point where Hiccup wouldn't recognize them. His attention was drawn to a flash of golden hair at the very end of the row of prisoners. Hiccup leaned forward in his chair, not sure if he saw correctly or if his senses were playing a trick on him. A small gasp escaped his mouth when the other adults moved over and he could clearly see who was walking at the very end of the group. Astrid. Hiccup suddenly felt very uncomfortably in his armor and he felt the heat in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the temperature. He could only stare in awe at the girl, no, woman, that was being brought to him. There was only one word he could describe her with. Beautiful, he thought. Almost nothing in her appearance had changed. Of course, she wasn't immune to the passing time, but Hiccup had no doubts that the growth spurt was good for her. He couldn't help but notice that her hair was arranged differently than what he remembered. It was a subtle change, though. She still had a single braid that was hidden behind her back. The loose strands of her hair were kept in place with her crowns in, but a few of them were actually set free. Hiccup noticed that she let more of her hair out than what he remembered. He couldn't see her eyes from that far away, but he was sure that they still were as blue as the ocean. The most beautiful shade of blue Hiccup had ever seen. He couldn't help but notice the changes that happened to her body as well. The young girl he knew was gone and a woman was present in her place. Astrid's form had some more feminine shapes with much more noticeable breasts and slightly wider hips. Hiccup straightened himself in his chair. "I don't know what special you've seen in that girl," Irette commented in a whisper, leaning towards him. The great hall was already filled with angry shouts, just as it was when Dager was still there. Hiccup turned his head to look at his second-in-command, not believing what he's just heard. "Are you blind?" he asked in disbelief. "I bet she's Freya herself, or at least her creation." "I'm not sure," Irette replied, still not convinced. "I mean, there's too much resemblance between her and her brother." Hiccup looked at him as if he had grown out a second head. "Not this one, the second blonde," he said, not believing that he had to correct him. Irette scanned with his eyes the group until his gaze rested upon the woman Hiccup was referring to. He also straightened himself in his chair. "Oh boy," he commented under his breath. "I've told you," Hiccup replied smugly, eyeing the group in front of him, though his gaze always lingered a little longer on Astrid. "And I was beginning to worry that something might be wrong with you," Irette said, chuckling slightly. Hiccup rolled his eyes at the comment. "Now I can see why you didn't forget her." "Man, a nice one indeed," he said, rubbing his non-existent beard. "I think I already know what sentence you will pass on them," he added teasingly. "What do you mean?" "Oh come on," Hiccup, Irette replied, once again looking at his chief. "You are a leader here and they've attacked us unprovoked. We've dealt with someone like them today. Do you seriously suggest I should execute them?" Hiccup asked, hoping that he didn't understand him correctly. Irette nodded his head. "Yeah," he confirmed. "Most of them, at least. I mean, you can take that blonde girl. What was her name?" "Astrid." "Astrid. You can take Astrid to your bed if you want, but I say you should get rid of the rest. I think they should share Dager's fate. I'm sure he would appreciate it if he didn't suffer alone." "I can't do that," Hiccup replied, terrified at the very thought, though he didn't allow his fear to be heard in his voice. "Why?" "Because one of them is my father," he hissed at Irette. "Oh. Seriously, Irette, sometimes I wonder what's going through that sick head of yours," Hiccup said, shaking his head in disbelief. Irette smirked at that. "I only care about the well-being of Driki," he replied honestly. "And from what I hear, I'm not the only one who thinks that this would be the right decision," he added, looking around the great hall. Hiccup followed his gaze and noticed that the inhabitants of Driki were just as furious as when Dager was being judged by him. The angry shouts were blending into a single word: kill. Hiccup gulped loudly, though no one heard it over the noise of the great hall. "No," Hiccup shook his head and turned around. "Toothless, would you mind?" he asked his dragon before Irette could say something else. The black dragon heard its rider perfectly well and let out a mighty roar that silenced everybody in the great hall, humans and dragons alike. "Is that a?" Hiccup heard the question being asked in the group of prisoners. Night Fury. Chapter 4. Well, what do we have here?" Hiccup began after Toothless caused everyone to go silent. He was surprised his voice didn't crack. He felt as if he hadn't been drinking anything for the past few days. "Stoic the Vast, chief of Berk, a famous dragon killer in the flesh, to what do I owe this questionable pleasure?" he asked, trying to sound as boldly as possible. If there was one thing he learned for the past few years, it was to always make a good first impression. "How do you know my name?" his father asked, not replying to his question. Hiccup felt his insides twitch violently when he heard a pure hatred in Stoic's voice that was reflected in his eyes. He was grateful that his face remained hidden. "And wouldn't it be fair if I knew your name as well?" he added. "Show some respect," the guard near him scolded him, hitting him with the flat side of his axe. Stoic grunted when the blade made contact with his body. "Enough." Hiccup scolded the guard and stood up from his seat. "Thank you, Steinar, I'll handle it from here," he said to the guard. The man bowed his head in respect and retreated. Hiccup walked around the table and approached the group of prisoners, just as he did previously while judging Dager. "Now, where are my manners?" Hiccup asked rhetorically, chuckling slightly. My name is Riddery, Chief of Dreeki. Hiccup introduced himself, trying to sound as friendly as possible. Stoic's eyes were casting lightning at him. As for how I know you, well, first of all, my men have seen the crest on your sails. A dragon impaled by 2 swords. Trust me when I say it, we know everything about each tribe that boasts about killing dragons, and we don't find it admirable here, he said, all the time trying to sound as confident as possible. Second, your fame precedes you, but as I've told, we don't find it admirable here, he said, looking him straight in the eye. Even though he didn't show it, Hiccup was extremely nervous. Never before had he had the courage to stand up against his father. So I ask you again, to what do I owe this questionable pleasure? Stoic remained silent, only glaring at Hiccup. The young man in front of him stood bravely against his glare, something not many people could praise themselves with. I do not speak with the traitors, he finally spat, saying these words through clenched teeth. Hiccup backed away, suppressing a gasp that nearly escaped his mouth. Very well, he replied, trying not to sound too hurt. Then I think we should proceed with the accusations. You're not here without a reason, you know, Hiccup said and turned his head. Heather, could you enlighten me on what our guests have done, he asked, even if he knew everything already. It became a habit that every member of his tribe gets to know what the offender has done in order to pass the sentence. The black-haired woman nodded, still holding Zephyr on her lap. Our scout Havara was attacked by them a few days ago, Heather began. He and his dragon would have been killed if it wasn't for Iret and Kamikaze. Those Burkians have broken the truce between the archipelago tribes and attacked without a. Hey, Missy, don't meddle with things that don't concern you, one of the prisoners barged in on her. Hiccup turned his head back towards the group, hardly believing his ears. Go back to the bedroom where your place is. Hiccup followed the voice to its source. It was hardly a surprise for him to find out it was Snotlout who said these words. He heard a few shocked gasps erupt in the gathered crowd. Hiccup noticed Stoic scolding Snotlout, who seemed not to know why he was being reprimanded. Feeling his anger rising to a whole new level, the chief of Dreeki closed the distance between in a few quick strides. Using his momentum, Hiccup hit Snotlout hard across his cheek with the upper part of his palm. He couldn't help but smile when he noticed his cousin almost fell on the floor, taken aback by the sudden hit. You will learn to respect your hosts if you hope to leave my home with your tongue still in your mouth, Hiccup warned him. He felt odd. He had to admit that hitting Snotlout felt right to him. He could certainly get used to feeling this kind of pleasure. The grin behind his helmet grew even wider when he saw Snotlout's terrified expression. He clearly saw that his cousin wanted to say something in return, but Hiccup's threat stopped him from doing that. The chief of Dreeki noticed other prisoners, including his father and Astrid, rolling their eyes. He couldn't help but feel proud of himself. Who is this? He asked, looking about the group from Burke. My Stoic replied, still glaring at Snotlout. Hiccup couldn't help but snort at that. Stoic looked around shamefully when he heard other people who were gathered in the Great Hall snort as well. Hiccup cleared his throat. Well, then I'm sure you must be very proud of him, he replied, holding back a chuckle, though amusement was as clear as day in his voice. I mean, from what I know, Vikings always were led by brawns, not brains, he chuckled, earning a wave of laughter from his people. Both Stoic and Snotlout turned red, one from anger and the second one from embarrassment. Hiccup chuckled one more time before calming down. Take these chains off of me and I'll gladly show you what those brawns can do, Stoic growled at him. Hiccup couldn't help but take a step back. He mentally slapped himself before reassuming his previous position. We shall see about that, he replied. Havara, he called out, looking around to find his man in the crowd. He had to push himself through the other villagers before Hiccup finally noticed him. Do you confirm what Heather had said? He asked. The man in his mid-30s nodded his head. He's lying, Stoic commented under his breath. I haven't been asking you, Hiccup replied emotionlessly. What harm has been done to you? He asked, once again addressing Havara. Nothing that wouldn't be healed by a good portion of ale, Havara joked, earning a few chuckles from others. How is Wincutter? Hiccup asked. She's fine, Havara admitted. A few scratches here and there, but nothing serious. She's a strong girl, he added. Are you seriously asking about the well-being of a dragon? Stoic asked in disbelief. Wind-Cutter is a member of my tribe as much as Havara or anyone else gathered here, Hiccup replied. Thank you, Havara, he said, addressing the man. He bowed his head and returned to his spot in the crowd. I don't see it ending well, Stoic, Hiccup admitted after a moment of hesitation. You see, you've attacked us without a reason. That man and his dragon attacked us first, Stoic countered, still eyeing him hatefully. Hiccup found Havara with his eyes. We didn't, he denied. He's lying, Stoic replied loudly. His words earned him a lot of angry shouts from the crowd, that were growing louder and louder with each second. Hiccup rolled his eyes and turned around. Toothless, he said to his dragon. It was a miracle that the Night Fury heard him in the first place. The black dragon roared again, just as he did before. Everyone went silent instantly. Hiccup turned around to face the group of Burkians once again. 6 of the prisoners had terrified expressions on their faces. The Night Fury's mighty roar was capable of striking fear in even the most experienced warriors. Only one person didn't look frightened. Astrid was looking at him with something that could have only been described as recognition. Her lips were slightly parted and she was looking intently into his eyes. Hiccup had no problem with holding Stoic's gaze, but something in Astrid's eyes made him feel extremely self-conscious. He nearly gasped when the realization struck him. She recognized me, he thought. Hiccup closed his eyes and turned to face Stoic again. And why should I believe you? Hiccup asked, doing his best to ignore Astrid's gaze that he could still feel on himself. Everyone who rides a dragon is a liar and a traitor to all Vikings, Stoic replied as if he was explaining the most obvious thing in the world. Hiccup laughed at that. I'll believe every single man, woman, and child on this island and then every dragon that lives here before I even consider believing any one of you, he countered. You leave me no choice then, Hiccup said, breathing in heavily. You've broken the truce between the tribes for no reason. You've come to our territory and attacked our scout. The law of the archipelago says what punishment is adequate to this crime, he explained, trying to delay the inevitable. The punishment for that is death, he finished. The Great Hall erupted with shouts of approval towards Hiccup and roars of hatred towards Burkians. Hiccup closed his eyes, not believing that he said those words. He turned around, deciding that it was time to return to his table. His walk was heavy and his armor felt even more restricting than before. During just one afternoon, he sentenced 8 people to death. We came here because we need help. A female voice stopped him. This one sentence proved to be just as effective in silencing everyone as Toothless' roar was. Hiccup turned around. It's been 10 years since the last time he had heard that voice, but he could never possibly forget it. Astrid was looking straight into his eyes and once again he felt incredibly self-conscious. She was visibly struggling against the shackles that bound her. She stood up but not without an effort. What did you say? Hiccup asked, breaking the silence that took hold of the Great Hall. We came here because we need help, Astrid repeated, ignoring Stoic who was muttering angrily something to her. Please, you have to listen to us, she begged. I admit that we attacked your scout without any reason, she said. Everyone reacted immediately after hearing her words. The angry shouts appeared again. Hiccup rolled his eyes and once again turned to Toothless to find help. The black dragon roared once again, silencing everyone. But we've attacked only because we were afraid, Astrid continued when her words could be heard again. She received a collection of comments from her fellow Burkians about how the Vikings were never afraid, but she ignored all of them. Her attention was focused only on Hiccup. Over the past few years the dragon raids on our home have intensified. If we don't do something about that, we most probably won't survive this winter, she admitted. Is that true? Hiccup asked, directing his gaze at Stoic. The chief of Berk nodded slowly. So tell me, what help did you expect to find here? We want to find the dragon nest and destroy it, Stoic replied. Hiccup watched him intently before a chuckle escaped his lips. Soon, this chuckle turned into a burst of full laughter. Soon, other Vikings joined him. Stoic continued only to glare at the young man in front of him that was laughing at him. And did you actually believe that we would help you with this? Hiccup asked. Amusement was still present in his voice. I'll tell you this, Stoic. There is no way I would ever go to the Helheim's Gate, he said in a serious tone. And why is that? Stoic asked, still glaring at him. Because I've been there already, Hiccup replied, looking him straight in the eyes. This earned shocked gasp not only from the Burkians but also from his own people. I've seen what lies deep within the Dragon Island, and there is no way I would risk the lives of my Vikings and my dragons in a war against that thing, he explained. I've been told once, long ago, that a good chief protects his people. And protecting also means not making new enemies when such a thing is not necessary, Stoic. I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you will find no help here. However, given the circumstances, I can alter the sentence, Hiccup declared, earning a lot of shocked gasps. Chief, they have attacked us. Heather began but was quickly shushed by Hiccup. They came here looking for help, Hiccup corrected her. It is true that they've attacked Havara, but both he and Windcutter are safe and sound, no harm is done. Besides, look at what they've been through. They set out to find us someone they consider to be their enemies just to ask us for help. They've been sailing here for 7 days with winter nearly upon them. And they did it just to find a way to save their village. I must admit it's quite impressive, Hiccup said, trying to reason with the gathered Vikings. A few of his people nodded their heads in agreement. Will you let us go then? Stoic asked, trying his best not to let his anger get the better of him. No, Hiccup replied immediately. Whatever your reasons could have been, it doesn't change the fact that you have attacked us. If it wasn't for Eret and Kamikaze, Havara and Windcutter would have been already dead. You will stay here as our prisoners and help us recover from our recent battles with Dager and his berserkers, he declared. Dreeki's inhabitants nodded and said some things in approval. You will stay here for the winter, he ordered. The repairs shouldn't take that long, but I'm pretty sure that by the time you're done, the seashore will be covered with ice and there is no way I will give you a single dragon to take you home. You will wait for the meltdown. You can't do this, Stoic hissed, struggling against his shackles. Burke will die this winter. You should have thought about it earlier, Chief, Hiccup replied. If attacking us is your way of asking for help, then imprisoning you is our way of saying no. You will be working from dawn till dusk, he said, looking the prisoners straight in the eyes. His gaze lingered for a while longer on Astrid, who was looking at him as if he had grown out a second head. The only help you will receive from us are the tools that you will be needing at work, but you will have to acquire other materials yourselves. No one from Dreeki, a Viking or a dragon, is allowed to help you. You will start immediately, he decreed. Steinar, he addressed the guard. Take your men and show our quests what has to be done, he ordered. You will be responsible for watching over them. Of course, Chief, Steinar replied and signaled at other guards to join him as they began to lead out the prisoners. You bastard! Stoic yelled at him. I suggest you hurry up, Stoic, Hiccup replied, ignoring the insult. Snow won't make your work easier at all. And it will start snowing very, very soon. Stoic screamed at him in anger, struggling against the shackles even more than before, though his efforts were in vain. Now prepare the feast. Hiccup ordered, receiving a collective roar of approval that effectively silenced Stoic's voice. We have more than one reason to celebrate, he said, gesturing at Eret and Kamikaze, who up till this moment were seating silently at the main table. The ex-dragon trapper stood up. We're getting married, he exclaimed, holding Kamikaze's hand. Cheers erupted in the great hall with increased strength, becoming nearly deafening. Hiccup couldn't help but laugh slightly. His people could have been different than the rest of the archipelago when it came to dealing with dragons, but they were still Vikings. And nothing could make them more ecstatic than a prospect of a huge feast. Hiccup looked towards the exit of the great hall and caught the last glimpse of Burkians before the doors were slammed shut behind them. He managed to see the expressions of two persons who mattered to him. He noticed Astrid's hurt look that nearly screamed at him, betrayal. He knew what that meant. She recognized him. Or maybe remembered him. He didn't. Then there was a look of raw, pure hatred on his father's features. Hiccup's smile faded away from his lips. During his time on Burke, many times he received disappointed or even angry looks from his father. But he never felt hated by him. Never in his life had he seen in his eyes such a strong desire to end someone's life. And the fact that this bloodlust was directed at him pained him even more. Hiccup sighed heavily and turned around from the doors. He began walking towards his place at the table. His walk was heavy once again. He approached his chair and collapsed heavily on it. Zephyr immediately sat on his lap after waking up from her nap. Hiccup patted her gently on her head, not looking at her. He sighed heavily once again, ignoring the commotion in the great hall. The interior was already being prepared for the feast. Usually, he would be ecstatic as any other member of his tribe, but this was not the case. He was sure that no matter how much ale he drank that night, he wouldn't find the solace that alcohol usually provided him with. Chapter 5. Hiccup emptied his mug and placed it on the table with a loud thud, but it fell on deaf ears. The noise in the great hall was big enough to drown out the sound of wood hitting wood. His helmet was lying on the table, not too far away from him. He looked up and smiled with acknowledgement at a woman who poured him more ale, refilling his mug. The woman smiled as well and disappeared in the crowd, supplying other Vikings with alcohol. He sighed heavily as he stared absent-mindedly at the content of his mug. He shook the wooden dish, watching as the golden liquor moved inside. He closed his eyes and brought the mug to his lips, swallowing ale loudly. He coughed violently when someone hit him hard on the back. Hiccup removed the mug from his mouth and placed it on the table, spilling some of its content onto himself and the wooden slab. He coughed a few more times, trying to get the alcohol out to breathe properly once more. He looked up to find out who dared to interrupt him in drinking. He really should have expected to see none other than Eret, standing right above him with a huge smile on his face. "You know, you could have waited until I finish my drink," Hiccup greeted him. Eret smirked at that. "I would have done it if it was someone else," Eret replied, sitting right next to him. He also had a mug in his hand. "But I know you, Hiccup. You wouldn't put back that mug unless it was empty. And I've been watching you today, you know. Don't you have a fiancé to watch after?" Hiccup asked, once again raising his mug. He took a big gulp while Eret chuckled at the comment. "I mean, you're acting strangely, even for you," he explained, earning a surprised look from Hiccup. "Oh come on, don't give me this look. We've been drinking together for a few years now, I know how fast you can drink. And only second mug. I would say I'm disappointed with you, Hiccup, but I know you long enough to notice that something's bothering you. So, being a good friend I came to you to help you with whatever is nagging you so you can get drunk like a normal person," Eret cleared out, still smiling from ear to ear. Hiccup rolled his eyes at that. "A subtlety of an avalanche," Hiccup commented under his breath, taking another sip from his mug. Eret ignored his words and continued to look intently at his chief. Hiccup sighed heavily when his second-in-command didn't back down. "Don't you want to say anything about how I dealt with our prisoners?" he asked, not replying to his question directly. "Well, Burkians didn't deserve mercy if you ask me," Eret replied, rubbing his non-existent beard. The blue tattoo beneath his mouth was crumpling up alongside the skin on his face. "But Dagur, oh my!" Eret quickly added, not noticing the look Hiccup directed at him. "Couldn't have done it better myself," he admitted, patting Hiccup on the shoulder. The chief of Driki anticipated his movement and put away his mug in the last second possible to avoid spilling any more of its content. "And what would you have me done, he asked, looking Eret straight in the eye. The man wiped off the remnants of ale from his mouth before speaking. "As I've said, they didn't deserve mercy," Eret explained. Hiccup looked at him as if he had grown out a second head. "Don't look at me like that, you've said it yourself that they were to be executed." "I've only said that the punishment for breaking the treaty is death," Hiccup replied. "And later you've said yourself that you will alter the sentence," Eret countered. "And that was the mistake in my opinion. You knew from the beginning that you wouldn't kill them, so you shouldn't have said those words." "Why?" Hiccup queried, stirring the content of his mug. "The chief should stand by what he says," Eret explained. "Some of your people are not too content with your judgment," he revealed. "I've seen their reactions. You have lost some of the respect around here." Hiccup looked around the great hall. His position at the table allowed him to see everyone gathered there. He noticed a few Vikings were glowering at him. He hid his lips behind the mug of ale, his eyes were still scanning the room. "And some people think that Dagur will also escape death," Eret finished, taking a sip from his mug as well. Hiccup looked down at his ale. He stirred the dish again and emptied it in one swift gulp. He sighed contently. It wasn't long before the same woman poured him another portion of liquor. Dager was avoiding his fate for far too long, Hiccup replied. As I've told him, I won't do the same mistake again. Good, Irette commented. So now all you have to do is carry out the sentence, he added, leaning back in his chair. What do you mean that I have to carry out the sentence? Hiccup asked him, looking away from his mug. He looked Irette straight in the eye. The ex-dragon trapper had an innocent look on his face. What? He asked in the reply. The Blood Eagle was your sentence. And if you want to be respected, not only on Driki but also around the archipelago, you should give them the reason to respect you. I was raised to believe that the man who passes the sentence should be the one to carry it out as well. Are you kidding me? Hiccup hissed, feeling the blood leaving his face. I can't do that. Why? Irette asked, taking a sip of cool liquor. A moment later, the woman approached him and refilled his mug. You have to make an example out of him. But why me? Hiccup asked, also taking a sip from his mug. I've told you, the man who passes the sentence should be the one to carry it out. You have to make an example out of Dager. Otherwise, it will be a matter of time before we would be attacked again. And performing the Blood Eagle will be the perfect way of regaining the respect. Wouldn't the beheading be sufficient as well? Hiccup asked. Irette shook his head. No, he denied. You've said it yourself that killing him would be too merciful. Besides, a quick death is not the way to earn respect. And how do I earn it then? He queried, looking him straight in the eye. Respect is gained by strength or fear, Irette explained. The Vikings in the archipelago see strength in fighting and killing the dragons. I think it's obvious that this option is unavailable to us. So, that leaves fear. Respect built on fear isn't worth much, Hiccup countered. Irette shrugged his shoulders. It's better than having no respect at all, Irette replied immediately as if he was anticipating Hiccup's words. He effectively silenced the chief of Driki. And it's crucial that you're the one who executes Dager, because when people will think of Driki, they'll picture you, he explained. Hiccup was staring absent-mindedly into his mug. Just as when someone thinks of Berk, he pictures your father. When someone thinks of the outcasts, he pictures Alvin. And when someone thinks of the berserkers, he pictures Dager, at least for now, he trotted out. The village is judged by its chief, he continued when Hiccup didn't say anything. Stopping Dager after what he's done to some of the tribes of the archipelago is impressive, I'm not denying that. But you have to put an end to him in a way that will prevent others like him from rising. As I've said, otherwise it'll only be a matter of fact before we would be attacked again, he finished. Hiccup sighed heavily and massaged his eyes. He was right, alcohol wasn't giving him solace that night. You could have told me earlier about it, he replied, mumbling those words against his mug. It was a miracle that Irette has heard him. I could have, but you wouldn't have done it then, he countered. You're damn right I wouldn't, Hiccup snapped at him. I mean, the Blood Eagle. There's no way I'm going through with it. You can't back away now, Irette countered. Yes, I can. I am the chief. Not for long if you back away, Irette replied, looking him straight in the eye. Hiccup, long ago you've asked me to advise you when it came to running the village. You can't blame me for doing what you've wanted me to do. I can't do the Blood Eagle. Hiccup hissed, turning right to look at Irette. You know how I feel about killing in the first place, and now I'm supposed to execute Dager like that. Thorsbeard, I haven't even seen anyone perform the Blood Eagle before. I'm pretty sure even my dad hasn't performed it in his life. That's one more reason to do that, Irette said seriously. Hiccup, do you really believe that once you let them go they are just going to forget about us? He asked when he noticed a puzzled expression on the younger man's face. They're your prisoners and it's a humiliation for them. As soon as they get back to Berk, they'll assemble an army and will visit us shortly, unless you give them a reason to fear us. To fear you, he cleared that out. Like, having them watch you performing the Blood Eagle. Irette suggested. Hiccup glowered at him. Don't look at me like that, you know I'm right, he added. Hiccup turned away from Irette to face the great hall again. He sighed heavily again and lifted the mug to his mouth. Even though over half of the liquor was still there, he drank all of it without putting back the wooden dish. Hiccup suppressed a burp when he was done drinking. I really have to do that, don't I? Hiccup asked, once again staring absent-mindedly into the emptiness of his mug. You do, Irette confirmed, also emptying his mug. He didn't bother with suppressing a burp. Besides, think about Zephyr, he added when he caught a glimpse of the small girl running across the great hall. Hiccup followed her with his eyes as well. That way you will guarantee her safety as well. Hiccup nodded his head, seeing the reason behind Irette's words. Now come on, Hiccup, your mug has been standing empty for far too long to my liking. Don't you even try to worm your way out of celebrating with us, he warned him, though his voice held more amusement than seriousness. Actually, I think I'll call it a night, Hiccup replied, gathering himself to stand up from his place at the table. I need some time to think and it's too loud in here. Hey, I've told you that I wanted you to get drunk, he countered, catching Hiccup by the arm to prevent him from leaving. I'll take a barrel of ale with me, Hiccup replied, ripping off his hand from Irette's grasp. Don't worry, by the morning that barrel will be dry, he added when he noticed Irette was about to say something in reply. That silenced the ex-dragon trapper. Hiccup grabbed his helmet and left the table. Hiccup pushed past the inhabitants of Driki, wanting to find his daughter. He wasn't surprised when he found her playing with Toothless, surrounded by the adults from his village. He called her and his dragon, much to the protests of the small audience that was gathered there. He apologized to them but said that it was time for her to go to bed. Zephyr and Toothless followed him reluctantly. Hiccup managed to grab a barrel of ale on his way out before the doors to the great hall were slammed shut behind them. Hiccup enjoyed the sudden chill of the night on his skin. Zephyr ran downhill, followed closely by Toothless. The young chief watched with a smile on his face the interaction between his daughter and his best friend. He breathed in, taking delight in the cold, fresh air. He followed his daughter, heading towards his house that was standing not far away from the great hall. Zephyr continued her game with Toothless even at home, causing Hiccup to nearly lose his balance when he entered his hut. He laughed slightly, placing the barrel of ale on the floor. He slammed the door behind him, locking it from the inside. All right, sweetheart, time to go to bed, Hiccup ordered. But Dad, Zephyr moaned, immediately stopping pacing across their house. She looked at him with the most pleading eyes Hiccup had ever seen. No buts, my dear, Hiccup countered. You've been playing all night, it's time to go to bed, he said firmly. A few more minutes, Daddy, please, she begged, not backing down. Hiccup shook his head. No, he replied. Time to go to bed. Zephyr bowed her head and went upstairs, visibly sad. Hiccup watched her go with Toothless, who was sitting right beside him. He collapsed heavily on the chair when he heard the door to her room being shut. Hiccup opened the barrel and poured himself a generous amount of ale. The Night Fury was sitting right next to him, sensing his distress. What have I gotten myself into, Toothless? Hiccup asked him after taking a big sip of liquor. I know that Dager can't be spared, I've done that mistake often enough by now, but I can't perform the Blood Eagle, he groaned. But I cannot avoid it, you know. I can't just run away and start anew. That's not an option anymore, he mumbled, more to himself than to his dragon. Toothless let out a low grumbling. Then there is the matter of my father, Hiccup continued after drinking some ale. The last thing I expected to do in my life was to judge him for attacking my tribe. Can you imagine it, Toothless? He asked, chuckling slightly, though it was devoid of humor. The mighty stoic, the vast, judged by the sorry excuse for a Viking that his son is. He laughed. When I was leaving Berk I never thought I would ever see them again, he admitted, staring blankly at the wall in front of him. And yet, that's what happened, he added after his laugh died out. I should have guessed that would happen when I've returned to the archipelago, he commented, bringing the mug to his mouth. You know what's the worst, Toothless? He asked him. The black dragon lifted its head when it heard its name being spoken. Dad never was very proud of me, he explained. When I still lived on Berk, I was capable of making even more damage than dragons during the raids. The first thing I remember about Dad is how disappointed he was. I'm pretty sure he'd rather had a son that was more like Snotlout, he mused. He couldn't help but smirk at that comment. In fact, he does, in some way. Did you know that my cousin has been made an heir in place of me? I give Berk less than a day before it burns down to the ground once he takes over, he chuckled. He continued to reveal to Toothless what's been nagging him all day. The more he said, the more ale he drank, allowing the alcohol to claim him. Soon, he was sleeping in the chair with Toothless right next to him on the floor. Hiccup jerked when he was woken up. He looked around, violently shaking his head in every direction. He calmed down when he saw Zephyr standing right next to him. She was holding a stuffed toy that looked just like Toothless. But Hiccup immediately got worried when he noticed the terrified look on his daughter's face. "Zephyr, what are you doing?" he asked, suppressing a grunt. He closed his eyes tightly, feeling the throbbing pain in his head. "You should be in bed," he said, looking at the window. There was no light coming in through the cracks between the wooden planks, so he guessed the night hadn't ended yet. "I had a nightmare," she admitted, whispering those words as if she was afraid of saying them. Hiccup sighed and lifted her, bringing her close to his chest. Zephyr nestled against him without a word, hiding her face in his armor. "The same one as usual?" Hiccup asked, afraid to know the answer. Zephyr nodded her head violently in confirmation. He sighed heavily again and hugged her tighter. "When is Mommy coming back?" he heard her mumble against his chest. Hiccup closed his eyes and cursed silently. "I don't know, sweetheart," he replied. "She said she had some things to sort out," he added, grateful that she wasn't looking at him. "Did she abandon us?" Zephyr asked, lifting her head. Hiccup looked down and met her eyes with his own. Two pairs of green eyes were staring into each other. "She didn't," Hiccup denied, holding back a sob. He couldn't allow his daughter to see his emotion. "She will be back one day, you'll see," he added, trying to smile, though he failed miserably at that. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked, looking at him pleadingly. Hiccup nodded his head, afraid to say anything. He feared that if he said as much as a single word, he wouldn't be able to keep a straight face anymore. He cleared his throat after a moment. "Go to bed," he said, grateful that his voice didn't fail him. "I'll join you in a minute," he added. Zephyr nodded and leaped off of his laps. Hiccup watched her walk slowly to his room. "How am I supposed to tell her the truth, Toothless?" he asked, whispering those words. The dragon didn't reply, still sleeping soundly. "It will break her heart when she finds out," he added. He looked down at his mug, noticing the remnants of ale in it. He emptied it and placed the mug on the small table. After taking in a shaky breath, Hiccup stood up and followed his daughter to his room. He found her already in the bed, hugging tightly the stuffed Night Fury. He approached the bed, trying not to make a single sound. He lied down next to her, embracing her carefully. Zephyr turned around and nestled against him, hiding her face in his chest. Hiccup sighed heavily as he pulled back a single strand of her hair that managed to slip out of the small braid. Soon, he drifted off to an uneasy sleep. Chapter 6. Hiccup woke up when the sun rays entered his room, falling directly on his face. He groaned, annoyed beyond belief, and tried to turn in the other direction in an attempt to prolong his sleep. He had to turn back, though, when his body hit something small that was lying in his bed. Hiccup opened one eye, wanting to find out what was there. Before he saw anything, he closed his eye and groaned heavily once again. He immediately brought his hand to massage his aching temples. "Dear gods," he muttered, and felt as if his throat was on fire. "Water," he begged in his mind. "Dear Odin, why have you blessed us with the alcohol and at the same time cursed us with the hangover?" he asked, hoping to receive an answer. He sighed when he got none. He checked with his hand the object that was lying next to him, hoping that it would be a bottle, filled with any sort of liquid. He was surprised when his hand met someone's hair. "Wait, hair?" he asked when his mind caught up with his senses. He forced himself to open his eyes, looking at the form next to him. He recalled what happened the previous night when he noticed Zephyr lying in his arms, cuddling the stuffed Night Fury. He sighed again, remembering the reason why his daughter was sleeping with him. He removed his arm from her, trying to move as subtle as possible. The last thing he wanted was to wake her up after what she's been through during the night. Hiccup placed both his legs on the floor and decided to stand up. That was a bad idea. The world around him spun violently, nearly causing him to lose balance. He managed to support himself against the wall in the last second possible before he fell to the ground. He glanced at the bed and sighed with relief. Zephyr was still sleeping soundly. Trying to ignore the pain in his head, Hiccup left his bedroom, rubbing his face with the palm of his hand. The only part of drinking that he hated was sobering up. He entered the kitchen and noticed that Toothless was still sleeping at the same spot as Hiccup remembered. He snorted after seeing his dragon lying on its back. Toothless' snout was opened slightly and his tongue rolled out. Hiccup couldn't help but wonder what his father would think if he saw the unholy offspring of lightning and death itself sleeping like an overgrown dog. He approached his dragon and scratched it under its chin. Toothless purred happily at that, though he didn't wake up. Hiccup scanned the kitchen, looking for anything to drink. He was afraid that if he didn't find anything, his throat would collapse or be permanently damaged. The first thing he noticed was the barrel that he brought with him from the Great Hall. He came to it, hoping that he would find at least a single gulp inside. He groaned heavily when he saw only the bottom of the barrel and mentally slapped himself for drinking all ale. He smirked when he recalled his words from the previous night. "Don't worry, by the morning that barrel will be dry," his words resonated in his mind. "Every time it ends in the same way and yet I'm still doing it," he mused to himself, shaking his head. That proved to be a bad idea, though, when the pain intensified. He groaned once again and began searching for anything else to drink. He cursed himself again when he noticed that the barrel for water was empty. He sighed heavily. He forgot to get the water the previous day. He cursed again and began searching through the cupboards, suddenly remembering something. "Come on, I know you're somewhere here," he said to himself, peeping in every corner. "Don't hide, come to Daddy," he continued, shuffling his dishes. "Ah! There you are," he exclaimed happily, pulling out a glass bottle. Hiccup grinned from ear to ear, stirring the red liquid that was inside. He uncorked it and smelled it. He smiled even wider when he felt a sweet scent of wine. He took a first big sip and sighed contently. The sweet liquid was a real salvation for his dried throat. He sighed again and headed towards the exit of his house. He felt that the fresh air would be good for him. He sighed contently again. From his patio, he could see his entire village and the rising sun far beyond the horizon. He closed his eyes and enjoyed the peaceful sounds of the village coming to life as well as the warm sun rays on his face. A couple of terrible terrors flew by him. He smirked, cracking open a single eye. The two small dragons were fighting over something with each other. Hiccup took another sip from the bottle and sat down on the bench that was standing on the patio. His smile faded quickly when he heard a commotion somewhere below him. Taking another sip, Hiccup lazily leaned over the low fence that surrounded the patio of his house. He sighed heavily when his eyes confirmed what he suspected. Stoic and the rest were already working in the village and they were arguing with someone, most probably one of the guards who was watching over them. He groaned and pulled back his head, resting it against the wall of his house. He closed his eyes and tried to block out the sounds from below. Hiccup. He heard his name being spoken not far from him. He sighed heavily and hid the bottle of wine behind himself. "So much for a peaceful morning," he said to himself. Hiccup opened his eyes. "Do you ever sleep, Irette?" he asked the man who was approaching him. Hiccup noticed a huge bruise on his cheek that wasn't there when he last saw him. The black-haired man chuckled at that. "I've tried, but the ale I drank tonight forced me to find something new to drink," Irette replied, walking up the steps. He was now standing on Hiccup's patio. "And how did that bring you to me?" he asked, squinting his eyes. "I found out that I had no water," Irette replied, sitting at the bench right next to him. "And I thought you might have some, and your house is the closest one to mine, so it seemed the only logical choice." "I'm sorry to disappoint you, Irette, but I also have no water," Hiccup replied. He watched his second-in-command grow sad visibly. "I've got something much better," he added, lifting the glass bottle from behind him. Irette's eyes widened at that. "Odin's beard, where did you get such a treasure?" he asked, gladly accepting the flask from Hiccup. He wasted no time in bringing it to his mouth. He gulped loudly and sighed contently when he felt the relief that the red liquid brought him. "From my time in Rome," Hiccup replied. "The man I got it from said that it can stand for a few years and still be drinkable. I've just remembered it this morning." "I thought that your time in Rome wasn't that pleasurable," Irette replied. Hiccup instinctively reached out his hand and rested it on his chest where his scar was. You're right, it wasn't. But I've managed to snatch a few things on my way out, Hiccup replied, winking at him. He took the flask from Irette and took a sip. The ex-dragon trapper laughed slightly. So, care to explain that bruise on your face? Hiccup asked, changing the topic. Irette laughed again. From what I remember, I was fighting with someone, Irette replied. Though I have no idea who that might be. Maybe Camille? Hiccup suggested with a smirk. Irette shook his head. No, he denied. I would never hit her, he said. I know, Hiccup replied. But you should regret that you haven't stayed longer, Irette said immediately. I mean, the party didn't even begin by the time you were gone. I know, but, as I've said, I needed to clear my head, Hiccup replied, drinking from the flask. Besides, Zephyr had to go to bed. She's still a small girl, she can't stay up too long. And, she had that nightmare again, he added quietly. Irette hummed at that, seeming to be deep in thoughts. Do you think that she remembers what happened that night? Hiccup asked, looking him straight in the eye. I mean, she was like 5 months old at best. There is no way in which she can remember anything from that night, he said, trying to convince himself. Irette shrugged his shoulders. I don't know, he replied. Her dreams say otherwise. They've been gone for so long, Hiccup whispered, not caring if Irette heard him. I know, Irette replied. I'm not sure if she actually remembers what happened that night, but I know who is to be blamed for her nightmares, he said, flashing Hiccup a knowing look. Hiccup nodded his head, ruffling his beard. He licked his lips, finding a lost droplet of wine on them. I'll make him suffer, Irette, Hiccup said, gritting his teeth. I swear it to you, everyone in the 9 realms will hear his screams. And Dager will be cursing the day he found out about us. He will regret the day when he decided to attack us for the first time. He will be screaming at the top of his lungs, until I pull them out from his back, he said, glaring forward. His anger was written all over his face. If he suffers in silence, he may enter Valhalla, I know, Hiccup finished for him, stopping him in mid-sentence. I swear to every god in Asgard that I'll make sure he doesn't get this honor. He turned his head left and looked at Irette. Inform everyone that Dager's execution will take place tonight, he said seriously. Yesterday you didn't want to do that at all and now you're rushing it, Irette commented. What has happened? I've seen my daughter wake up in the night, crying, Hiccup explained. That's all the convincing I needed. Go down to our prisoners and order them to build a platform with 2 poles in the middle, he ordered, thinking about Dager's upcoming execution. The prospect of performing the Blood Eagle scared the life out of him, but he was willing to do everything to protect his daughter. Irette nodded his head, signaling that he understood. Can you and Camille take care of Zephyr for today, he asked. Irette nodded his head once again. I will need to prepare myself and I don't want her to be around then. Is she allowed to watch Dager's execution? Irette asked. He was surprised when Hiccup nodded his head. Yes. I'd prefer it if she didn't, but she's a member of this tribe and was hurt by Dager like everyone else. She deserves to see him being brought to justice. She's just 4 years old, but... He trailed off, not knowing what he wanted to say. When I was her age I've killed my first dragon, Irette commented, looking at the peaceful waters of the ocean. Are you boasting about it or complaining? Hiccup asked with sarcasm in his voice. Just saying, Irette replied. She may be a child but she's a Viking, just like everyone here. It's better if she starts living our way as soon as possible. Go inform the Burkians about their objective, Hiccup ordered, changing the topic. He stood up from the bench. The flask was empty and the pain in his head lessened noticeably. I want everything to be ready by nightfall. Right away, Irette replied and stood up, ready to leave. Oh, by the way, I have a small request, he said, just as he was about to leave. What is it? Hiccup asked, turning around to face Irette again. Could you take a look at it? Irette queried, handing him a small rolled-up piece of paper. Hiccup looked at him questioningly and rolled it out, noticing a drawing of 2 circular objects and some notes around them, including numbers that turned out to be the exact sizes. One of Hiccup's eyebrows drifted upwards. I can provide you with all the materials that are written down, Eret said quickly, noticing Hiccup's look. The chief of Driki chuckled slightly. You want me to make them, he guessed, examining the designs closely. Yes, and does it really say here dragon scales? Hiccup asked, lifting his gaze from the scroll. Eret scratched the back of his head. Yeah, I thought they might be a nice little touch to those rings, he explained. Hiccup couldn't help but chuckle slightly. You know that dragons are fireproof for a reason, right? He asked, laughing slightly. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with their scales, he added, chuckling again. Oh, come on, Hiccup, give it a try, Eret pleaded. I know that melting them down can be difficult, but try at least. I'm sure it's not impossible, he said, looking him straight in the eye. Hiccup sighed heavily. I promise I'll take care of it, but tomorrow, he replied. Eret grinned at that. Thanks, Hiccup, he said, and turned around to leave. I'll drop by the forge tomorrow and leave you the materials, he added, not waiting for a reply. Hiccup turned around and entered his house. Toothless was beginning to wake up slowly. The black dragon was yawning when Hiccup entered. The chief of Driki chuckled and told his dragon to get up. He grabbed the water barrel and prepared to leave his house. Dad, where are you going? Hiccup heard a question after he turned around to leave with Toothless. He stopped dead in his tracks and turned in Zephyr's direction. To get some water, he explained, gesturing at the barrel he was holding in his hand. Zephyr didn't seem to be convinced by his words. You're not leaving again, are you? She asked fearfully. Hiccup felt as if his heart was ripped out of his chest when he saw her saddened expression. He kneeled in front of her and opened his arms, offering her a big hug. She smiled and ran up to him, crashing against his chest. I'm not leaving, sweetheart, Hiccup replied, hugging her tightly. He felt her hot breath on his neck, and a moment later, she clenched her small arms around him even tighter. He kissed her on the top of her head. Actually, I think I will be staying here for the entire winter, he added, not breaking the hug. Then why do you have your suit on? She asked, pulling back from him. Hiccup looked at her with a puzzled expression before he realized what she meant. He chuckled slightly. No, I've just forgotten to take it off yesterday when I was falling asleep, he chuckled, ruffling her hair. Zephyr smiled at the affectionate gesture. As I've said, I'm only going to get water. Which reminds me, you will stay with Uncle Eret and Aunt Cammy today, okay? He asked, watching her reaction. Zephyr saddened visibly at that. Why? She asked simply. Hiccup took in a deep breath, wondering how he should explain it. Because tonight Daddy will have to do something important and he must prepare himself for that, he replied, not wanting to explain her in detail what he was supposed to do. Zephyr, he said her name. The small girl looked him straight in the eye. You know I love you, right? He asked. His daughter nodded her head quickly, earning a smile from Hiccup. She returned it. I want you to know that whatever you'll see me doing tonight, I will be doing it because I love you, and to protect you, he said, not breaking the eye contact. Zephyr frowned at that. I don't understand, she complained. You'll understand when you're older, Hiccup replied and stood up, grabbing the empty barrel with one of his hands. Come on, I'll walk you to Aunt Cammy, okay? He offered, giving her his other hand. She accepted it and they both left their house with Toothless following them closely. Can I ride on Toothless? Zephyr asked, jumping ecstatically. Hiccup laughed at that. You always know how to have your way with me, he thought to himself. I don't know, you should ask him, Hiccup replied, still smiling widely. He put down the empty barrel. Zephyr turned to the dragon and asked the same question. The Night Fury let out a series of growls and other weird noises. Hiccup chuckled slightly and picked up his daughter, placing her in his saddle. He picked up the barrel again. Zephyr was still a little awkward on Toothless' back. She was trying her best to hold herself by the reins, though her posture was unnatural. It was as clear as day that she was nervous. You should trust him a little more, you know, Hiccup commented, watching his daughter. She wasn't afraid of dragons, she only feared to ride on them, which is why Hiccup allowed her to spend as much time on Toothless' back as possible. She had to learn how to ride a dragon if she was to follow in his footsteps. And he was very proud of her that she was facing her fears, instead of letting them overwhelm her. Zephyr listened to his words and allowed Toothless to take some control in walking. She still was gripping the reins tightly, though she relaxed a little. Hiccup smiled at her and watched as she was continuing her ride on the Night Fury. He couldn't help but be amazed by the fact of how gentle Toothless was with her, compared to how he treated Hiccup. The young chief recalled the first time he flew with Toothless holding onto his tail, operating his prosthetic fin by hand, and his landing in the pod in the cove on Burke. He smiled, remembering the pleasant memories. He was roughly pulled back to the present when he heard a rather heated argument somewhere below. He opened his eyes and looked down, annoyed that the day couldn't be as beautiful as it seemed to be. He wasn't surprised when he saw the source of the unpleasant noise. Snotlout was arguing with one of the guards about something. Hiccup shook his head and sighed heavily. Dealing with them was something he most certainly didn't want to do during the hangover. "Who are they, Daddy?" Zephyr asked, also noticing the argument that was going on. "The part of my past that I really didn't want to come back to," Hiccup replied, observing the Vikings. The group from Burke was doing as he ordered them and have started working on repairing the damaged houses. However, their attention was currently focused on the wooden elevation that he needed for the evening. The destructions weren't large, but they were there nonetheless, and winter was already approaching. Hiccup breathed in deeply, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. It wouldn't be long before the first snowfall. He gasped suddenly when one of the Burkians made eye contact with him. Astrid, he realized immediately. She was watching him intensively, even though there was a large distance between them. Hiccup couldn't help but take a step backward, taken aback by the ferocity of her gaze. He gulped loudly when he realized that the route to Kamikaze's house would mean walking by the group of the prisoners. He cursed himself mentally when he realized that he left his helmet at home. "Come on," he said, turning his attention back to Zephyr. "I'm sure that Aunt Cammy can't wait to see you." Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup was lying in a wooden bathtub, sighing contentedly from time to time. He nearly forgot how good it actually felt to relax in a hot water with a flask of ale in one hand. He brought the bottle to his mouth. Emptying its content, he put the bottle down. He couldn't help but smirk. Irette would roast him if he knew that he only drank one bottle of ale. But Hiccup couldn't be drunk that night. He knew that what he had to do would require a steady hand and a sharp mind. But he also knew that it would be impossible for him to do it completely sober. He sank deeper into the hot water, feeling it in his beard and hair. He exhaled through his mouth, observing a dozen or so of small bubbles that appeared on the water's surface. He chuckled humorlessly. He would need another bath after the night was over. He spent the entire day on preparations, both mental and physical. He made sure that every weapon he was about to use was razor sharp. Dagur didn't deserve even a shadow of mercy, but he wasn't going to go through it with blunt tools. He checked every possible book or note that he possessed, searching for the descriptions of the Blood Eagle. He didn't find anything other than what he already knew. He wished that he could drink more. He wished that the Blood Eagle meant cutting an eagle's picture on somebody's back. But it didn't. Cutting Dagur's back would be only a beginning and the least painful part of the entire night. Both for him and Hiccup. The young chief closed his eyes, trying to get his mind off of the upcoming events, though his efforts were in vain. No matter how hard he tried to recall the most pleasurable events of his life, his mind kept picturing only one thing: Dagur, kneeling in front of him, bleeding to death. "It has to be done," he said loudly, trying to convince himself. He recalled the first time Zephyr called him Daddy. He couldn't help but smile. "For you, my sweetheart," he said, even though his daughter wasn't with him at that moment. He opened back his eyes, fierce determination was filling them. Dagur was the man responsible for Zephyr's nightmares. If Hiccup couldn't end her bad dreams, he could end Dagur's life. He heard the doors to his house being opened. He turned around in the tub in order to see who entered his home. He didn't resurface, only his head was visible over the steaming hot water. He felt the liquid pouring down his face. "Everyone's already waiting," Heather informed him. Hiccup nodded his head. "And how do you feel about it?" he asked in reply. This is your brother after all. Heather snorted at that. He stopped being my brother long ago, she replied coldly. Hiccup nodded once again. I'll be there shortly, Hiccup informed her, turning his head in the opposite direction. Heather left his house without saying a word. The chief of Dreeki inhaled deeply once again and stood up, feeling the cold air all over his naked and wet skin. Let's get this over with. Chapter 7. Astrid groaned when she was woken up abruptly. The Vikings who were guarding them stormed into the prison, awakening everyone inside. From the little window that was at the wall at the end of a corridor, Astrid deducted that it was still the middle of the night. The guard opened their cells, ordering everyone to get up. Her fellow Burkians also groaned heavily as the guards brought them out of their cells. They wasted no time in attaching the chains that connected them. Astrid wiped her face, still groggy from her sleep. She noticed that the others did the same. Where are you taking us? Snotlout asked. One of the guards only smirked as he pushed Berkshire forward. Snotlout mumbled something incoherent about not being treated with respect, though it fell on everybody's deaf ears. Astrid noticed that not only they were being led out of the prison. Two guards entered another cell, lifting abruptly the prisoner that was thrown in there the day before. He saw the red-haired man struggling against the two Vikings. He earned himself a kick in the ribs which caused him to stop defending himself. Astrid couldn't help but wince. It wasn't hard for her to imagine the strength behind that blow. The eighth prisoner was grabbed by the two guards and brought out from his cell. He was being led at the front of the group of prisoners. The Vikings who were escorting them were carrying torches. They are going to execute us, Snotlout whispered in fear. Astrid would have laughed at how scared he was if she didn't worry about the same thing. After all, what other reason could they have to wake them up in the middle of night? Quiet, one of the guards ordered, hitting Snotlout with his axe's handle. Astrid noticed that they were being led towards the same spot where they've been working during the day. She immediately recalled the platform that they were ordered to build. We're going on an execution, she realized. She wouldn't admit it to anyone, but she was horrified. They've soon reached the wooden platform. It was then circled by the entire village, or so Astrid guessed. Almost everyone in the crowd was carrying a torch, causing the night to be as bright as the day. Only one person was standing on the elevation, his back was turned towards them. He was dressed in a white tunic with a brown belt around his midsection. He was barefoot. From what she could see, his medium-length hair was pulled backward, tied up in a single braid. The man turned around when they were closer to the platform and Astrid couldn't help but gasp at what she saw. That man was Hiccup. He looked completely different than during the day. His hair wasn't a mess to which she's grown so used to when he was still on Berk. His beard was full, though it wasn't as large as Stoic's. But it still gave him sharp facial features. The only things that didn't change at all were his eyes. They still were as green as the forest in the middle of summer, though at that moment they were filled with nothing but hatred and determination, a combination that Astrid has never seen in Hiccup's eyes. She also noticed a white paint around his eyes. It covered all skin of his face, except for the beard. There were also two red stripes that started above his eyes and went vertically downward, stopping right above his facial hair. Astrid wasn't sure if that was paint or blood. She had to admit that he looked frightening. If she hadn't seen him earlier that day, she wouldn't have recognized him. If I didn't know that his Night Fury was named Toothless, I wouldn't have recognized him, she corrected herself. Of all of the teens their age, Hiccup changed the most and she couldn't blame others that they didn't identify him when he was passing them by during the day. Those 10 years have surely been good to him. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup watched as Steinar and his men brought the prisoners towards the platform. The group of Burkians was roughly shoved into the crowd. They were part of the audience. The two guards, who were carrying dagger, went upstairs and brought the prisoner to Hiccup. Hiccup noticed the terrified expression on the man's face. "Tie him up," he ordered with a voice that he didn't recognize as his own. The two guards obeyed silently. No one dared to say a single word that night. They unshackled Dager and attached the chains to the two poles that were standing in the middle of the platform, stretching out his arms. The guards then stepped down from the wooden elevation and joined the crowd, leaving Dager and Hiccup alone. "On your knees," the young chief of Driki ordered. Dager looked him straight in the eye before violently shaking his head. "No," he whispered. "I said, on your knees." Hiccup repeated louder, saying those words through clenched teeth. He dried off the palm of his hand against his tunic. He didn't know if he was more stressed or Dager. His prisoner once again shook his head violently in denial. Hiccup sighed heavily and turned towards the crowd. He reached out with his hand and almost immediately received a hammer. Dager tried to turn around to see what he was doing, though Hiccup remained beyond his view. He struggled against the shackles, trying to get himself out. Hiccup approached Dager, who was still jerking, trying to free himself. He was wielding the hammer that was offered to him by one of the guards. He looked over Dager's shoulder, searching for Irette with his eyes. The black-haired man nodded his head slowly, understanding Hiccup's unspoken question. He was hugging Cammy with one hand while his second one rested on top of Zephyr's head. The small girl was standing right between them. Hiccup took in a shaky breath before hauling off and bringing down the hammer with full strength, aiming it at Dager's knee. The leader of the berserkers screamed in agony when he felt his knee being broken. He lost full control in his right leg and bent it, falling to the ground. Soon, another wave of pain overwhelmed him, this time in his second knee. He had no strength to stand anymore and was kneeling, supported only by the chains that kept him pinned to the wooden poles. "We haven't even started yet," Hiccup whispered to him when he leaned forward. He heard Dager gulp. He was terrified. "Have mercy, please," Dager begged, attempting to go for a futile attempt to save his life. "I've shown you mercy more times than you deserved," Hiccup replied coldly. "Third time's a charm. I swear it to you, I'll make sure that you don't dine with Odin tonight," he added viciously. The chief of Driki returned the hammer to its owner, thanking him with a nod of his head. The Viking smiled in return. Hiccup approached Dager from behind and gripped the shirt that he was wearing. With one strong pull, he tore it apart, leaving Dager's back naked to him. The leader of the berserkers was breathing loudly. Fear and pain were mixing inside him. Hiccup picked up a small dagger that was waiting patiently for him to use it. Axe was lying right next to it. He spun it a few times in his left hand, feeling the chill of metal against his skin. It was time to begin. Hiccup leaned down behind Dager, bringing his left hand to the bottom of the man's back. He took in the last shaky breath before thrusting the blade into the man in front of him, right above his pants. Dager hissed at that. Hiccup made sure that the blade didn't go too deep into his body. He just barely embedded it, enough to cut the skin. He directed the blade horizontally, bringing it towards Dager's spine. The blade glided on Dager's back, cutting the skin as if it was a sheet of paper. When Hiccup reached the spine, he directed the blade upward, cutting alongside the backbone. The entire bottom of Hiccup's robe was already covered in Dager's blood. He encountered no resistance while cutting open the left side of Dager's back. After bringing the blade all the way up to his shoulders, he turned left, creating some sort of bloody door. He repeated the entire process on the other side. He couldn't believe how much blood Dager has already lost. He was afraid that he would die too soon. The red, hot liquid was gathering beneath his feet in a puddle. He twitched his toes, feeling his enemy's blood between them. He placed down the small blade. Gathering his mental strength, Hiccup breathed in deeply. The cold air of the night was mixing with the smell of burning torches, creating a scent that could have been only described as the scent of death itself. He brought both of his hands to Dager's spine, tracing his fingers alongside the cuts he made. After taking in one more breath to steady his shaking hands, Hiccup dipped his digits beneath Dager's skin. He earned a sharp intake of breath from the man who was kneeling in front of him. After trying to calm his shaking arms, Hiccup removed the skin from Dager's back, opening it like one opens the doors. Although he was shaking uncontrollably and breathing in sharply, Dager still didn't scream. Hiccup couldn't help but twitch when he saw the body beneath the skin. He could see Dager's lungs working all the time through the space between his ribs. Hiccup once again searched for Irette with his gaze. The man was watching closely the whole thing. The chief of Driki thought that his second-in-command anticipated his subtle movement because he met his eyes with his own gaze immediately. No words were exchanged, only a small nod of the head from Miret's side. Hiccup picked up the axe and returned to his spot behind Dager's kneeling form. He knelt as well, feeling the gathered blood seeping through the thin material of his robe. Dager's breathing became louder when he sensed Hiccup kneel beside him. The chief of Driki rested his right hand on his shoulder, trying to steady himself. He didn't want to miss it. Hiccup lifted his left hand with which he was gripping the axe and quickly brought it down, making perfect contact with one of Dager's ribs. The leader of the Berserkers brought his head upward when he felt the impact. His lips were opened in a silent scream of pain as the blood erupted from his back. A few seconds later he felt another hit, a few centimeters lower than the previous one. Once again, he made no sound. The whole process continued seemingly endlessly. Hiccup took his time in chopping away the ribs from Dager's spine. First, 12 ribs on the left side, then the same amount on the right side, though the man still made no sound. The chief of Driki felt his enemy's blood pouring down his face and even lower into his beard. Some of it has gotten even into his mouth. Hiccup spat to the side, getting rid of the red liquid. It left an unpleasant aftertaste on his tongue. He held back a retch. Dager was panting heavily, though it wasn't the sound that Hiccup wanted to hear from his mouth. The rules were clear: if he screams, he would be denied the entrance to Valhalla. He had to admit that he was impressed. He could only imagine, though he didn't want to do it, the amount of pain that Dager was feeling. But his goal was clear: make the man in front of him scream with all his strength. And he was going to accomplish that, one way or another. He wondered if Dager's shouts when he broke his knees counted. After a few seconds, he realized that it didn't. It wasn't the part of the Blood Eagle. Hiccup put away the axe that he's been gripping tightly. Blood was pouring down all over it from the blade all the way down the wooden handle. He once again supported himself against Dager's shoulder. The palm of his hand was sliding due to the amount of blood on his skin. He might have cut Dager's ribs, but there was still a matter of severing them from his spine. It could have been done with the axe, but he didn't want to risk killing Dager prematurely. He breathed in deeply and gripped the bone that was on top of Dager's spine. He closed his eyes and ripped it off. The leader of the Berserkers shook visibly, jerking his head upward. Once again he opened his lips, though no sound came. Hiccup laid back the rib, placing it against Dager's skin that was hanging beneath his arms. Wings have already begun to form. He gripped another bone and ripped it off, repeating the same process with all 24 ribs. Underscore 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 underscore. Astrid watched in a mix of horror and awe what was taking place before her very eyes. Her lips were slightly parted, though no sound came. She and the rest of the Burkians were standing in front of the crowd, behind Hiccup's and the man's backs. That guaranteed them a perfect view. She couldn't help but look away when Hiccup ripped off another rib. She noticed that other people of her age also couldn't look at that. She wasn't surprised when she noticed that Fishlegs had his eyes closed. He wasn't a violent man, and watching someone being killed in such a drastic way would certainly be too much for him. But she had to admit that she was taken by surprise when she saw that Tough Nut and Rough Nut weren't watching as well. She thought that they would be even cheering Hiccup on, taking pleasure in what was taking place before their eyes. But they didn't. Even Snotlout couldn't watch, though he threatened to perform the Blood Eagle on anyone who dared to propose to her on Berk. Astrid couldn't help but smirk. She wondered if her future chief would have the guts to go through with it, or would he instruct someone to do it instead of him. She had to admit that Hiccup gained some respect in her eyes. For the first time in her life, she saw anyone performing the Blood Eagle. And never in her life has she even considered that it would be Hiccup of all people doing it. Astrid looked to her right, watching closely Stoic's and Gobbus' reactions. The old blacksmith was looking away from time to time, also not being able to bear what was going on. Her chief, however, was watching all the time with a similar expression to the one she had on her face. His eyes were wide opened, taking in everything that was happening. He might have been an experienced warrior, but he also was seeing the Blood Eagle for the first time. And it was scaring the life out of him, even though he refused to look away. That's what caused Astrid to admire her chief. He wasn't scared to face anything. She took one more glance at Snotlout. He was hiding his eyes behind his hand, refusing to watch Hiccup and his prisoner. Then, her eyes returned to Hiccup. But as Astrid watched the chief of Driki, she realized that it wasn't Hiccup anymore. It wasn't the lost heir of Berk, and neither was he the greatest disaster her village has ever known. His name is Riddery, she realized, recalling how he introduced himself. Her eyes widened when that thought crossed her mind. She finally knew what was wrong when she was looking at Hiccup. She refused to acknowledge it earlier, but she had no other choice at that moment. Whatever has happened to him during the past 10 years, it has killed the boy that she used to know, allowing the man in front of her to be born. She looked beyond the wooden platform, noticing the 3 people that she has seen during their trial. They used to be sitting at the same table as Hiccup in the Great Hall. The black-haired woman was watching closely the entire event, not looking away for a split second. She had a sadistic grin on her face as she was resting her weight against some odd kind of axe. Astrid wondered if she was Hiccup's wife. Or rather Riddery's, she corrected herself. She recalled seeing her holding the child that she saw on Toothless back earlier that day. That thought caused Astrid's eyes to be drawn to the mop of auburn hair, kept together by a single braid similar to the one she used to wear when she was younger. The little girl was hugging a leg of the black-haired man who came to them during the day and ordered to build the platform. Astrid noticed that he was also hugging the second woman who was sitting at the main table in the Great Hall. The blonde one had her face buried in the man's chest, just like the girl below them. Astrid found herself thinking about that. If the black-haired woman was the girl's mother, why wasn't she standing with her? She had absolutely no doubts that it was Hiccup's child. When they were passing them by, she examined her closely, noticing the same auburn hair and a similar pair of green eyes, though she couldn't quite match her features to any of the women who were standing there. She decided not to think about it at that moment and focused her attention back on the wooden platform. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup was nearly done ripping off the ribs from Dager's spine. Almost his entire robe was covered with blood, leaving only a handful of white spots here and there. The puddle under his feet and knees grew even larger. Some of the red liquid was even sipping through the planks and was falling on the ground below, sinking into the dirt. Only 4 ribs remained to rip off and the final stage would begin. Hiccup smiled wickedly when he heard a small scream escape Dager's mouth when he pulled out another bone. It was quickly stifled, though, as the Berserker leader pressed tightly his lips. Hiccup was sure that no one from the crowd has even noticed that, but he did. His smile grew even wider as he leaned forward until his mouth was right next to Dager's ear. "Say farewell to Valhalla," he whispered and ripped off another rib. Only 2 remained. Dager didn't even try anymore to hold back screams. He knew that he lost. Just as Hiccup promised to Eret earlier during the day, the Berserker leader started to scream at the top of his lungs. The silent night resonated with the sound of his cries of agony. Hiccup looked around, observing the villagers' reactions. Many of his people have closed their eyes, or plugged their ears, not wanting to listen to Dager's final screams. He looked at Eret, sighing with relief when he noticed that Zephyr wasn't looking and that her ears were covered. He really didn't want her to witness it, but it had to be done. He nodded wordlessly at Eret, who had his hand pressed tightly against Zephyr's head, nullifying the sounds. His second-in-command returned the gesture. Only 1 rib remained. Hiccup looked backward, scanning the entire crowd. His eyes rested on the group from Berk. Most of them were looking away, except for Stoic, Gobber, and Astrid. The 2 men had their eyes glued to Dager's back and didn't even notice Hiccup looking in his direction. Only Astrid met his gaze. He was locked with her in eye contact when he ripped abruptly, severing the last rib from Dager's spine. He noticed her flinch at that movement and then he saw something else on her face. It was fear. Astrid Horfason, the bravest and the best warrior of their generation, was scared of him. Hiccup smirked slightly before returning his attention to Dagur. His back was completely opened and the wings were fully formed. The last part of the execution remained. Careful not to touch anything else, Hiccup reached out both of his hands, aiming them at Dagur's lungs. He heard the man in front of him cough up blood. His screams have already died out. Hiccup couldn't care less, though. He achieved his goal. Dagur would never enter Valhalla's portals. Hiccup scowled when he touched the two huge organs. He pulled back his hands slowly, careful not to drop them, what proved to be a difficult task. Dagur's lungs were all covered with blood and became extremely slippery. However, Hiccup somehow managed to keep a steady hand, or rather hands, and pulled out both lungs without a struggle. He moved them upward, alongside Dagur's spine and brought them right next to his head. The Berserker leader looked absent-mindedly at his organs as Hiccup laid them on his shoulders. Blood was leaking down from his parted lips. The Blood Eagle was done. Hiccup stood up, observing the final effect of his work. It was truly horrifying. He wanted to look away or even go back to his house and drink himself to unconsciousness, just to get rid of that image from his mind, but he knew he couldn't do it. He had to remain until the very end. He comforted himself with the thought that it was finally over. Hiccup made a mental note to never sentence anyone to Blood Eagle ever again. Dagur was still alive. Hiccup could see his heart pumping, though it was slowly fading away. Also, his lungs were broadening slightly and after a moment they were shrinking back to their previous size. Hiccup forced himself to keep the content of his stomach from getting out through his mouth. He had to do it. He had to prove that he was strong enough to go through all of it. After what seemed to be an eternity, Dagur's head finally slumped down onto his chest. Hiccup watched as his lungs stopped working, followed closely by his heart. He closed his eyes and sighed with relief. It was finally over. Dagur and the Blood Eagle were finally over. Chapter 8. Hiccup was watching Dagur's corpse intently. Blood was still dripping from his opened back and from his parted lips, falling to the ground. After the execution, the two guards, who dragged Dagur from prison, unchained him and pulled his body from the wooden platform. The young man followed with his gaze the Berserker's ribs that were swaying in the gentle wind. The skin of his back collapsed, wrinkling up under his arms. Hiccup ignored the blood that was pouring down his skin. He felt the red liquid all over his body. The white tunic that he put on specifically for that night was entirely drenched with Dagur's blood, causing the material to stick uncomfortably to Hiccup's skin. For what seemed like 100th time that night, he held back a retch. He watched as Dagur's lifeless body was tied to two trees. Just as during his execution, his arms were stretched out, forming a letter T. His men pierced the loose skin of Dagur's back at their tops and pulled ropes through them. Thanks to this, his wings remained spread. Hiccup observed as the corpse swung steadily back and forth being rocked by the gentle wind. Dagur's eyes remained slightly opened, just as his lips, forever locked in a silent scream of pain. The blood was already ceasing to drop. Suddenly, Hiccup quickly turned around and ran away from Dagur's hanging corpse. Keeping his left hand close to his mouth, he made his way through the thinning crowd, heading towards the shadows cast by buildings. Many of his people have already returned to their houses and the prisoners were being escorted back to their cells. As soon as Hiccup found himself in the safety of darkness, his stomach gave up. He leaned forward and emptied the contents of his belly. He thanked silently all the gods he knew that he managed to hold back the wretch for so long. He kept on vomiting, completely emptying his stomach. He felt an unpleasant stinging in his throat. "I must admit you've lasted longer than I expected." Hiccup heard Iret's voice behind him. He wiped his mouth and turned around, facing his second-in-command. "I was worried that you would throw up while pulling out his lungs," he added, trying to turn it into a joke. Hiccup didn't find anything funny about that. "What kind of fucked up people are we, Iret?" he asked when he stopped vomiting. "I mean, what did our ancestors have in their minds that they came up with the Blood Eagle?" he asked, not actually expecting to receive an answer. "I need some ale," he added, though as soon as those words left his mouth, another wave of nausea hit him. Hiccup once again leaned forward. "I don't think you do," Iret replied, leaning against the wall. "And no matter what the person who came up with Blood Eagle had in mind, I must say that it was a piece of art you did there. Irette praised him. Hiccup only glared at him. And when I saw you coming to the execution, damn, I must admit I was terrified myself, he added, patting him on the shoulder. And from what I've seen, the Burkians were also afraid, he said with a knowing smirk. Hiccup glared at him again. I couldn't care less about the Burkians right now, he replied. The young chief felt Toothless nudging him on the shoulder. He turned his head in the dragon's direction and managed a small smile. He examined the eyes of his first friend and found something that resembled solace. He tried to smile wider. Thanks, bud, he said, patting Toothless on his head. The dragon purred slightly at that and licked Hiccup's palm. The Night Fury spat almost immediately, though. Hiccup laughed at that, realizing that he still was covered with Daeger's blood. Sorry, Toothless, he apologized and turned his head back towards Irette. How long has Zephyr been watching, he asked, remembering his daughter pressed tightly against Irette's leg. She stopped as soon as you broke Daeger's knees, the black-haired man replied, crossing his arms over his chest. She didn't see anything during the execution, he clarified as Hiccup threw up again. He cleared his throat. Thanks for holding her, he replied, once again wiping his mouth with the sleeve of his robe. He couldn't care less about the material at that point. It was already far beyond the point of saving. He would destroy it as soon as he returned home. I shouldn't have allowed her to come, he commented, straightening himself up, trusting that his stomach wouldn't turn against him again. And who would stay with her? Irette asked rhetorically. Everyone was here tonight. There was no possibility to leave her out of it. As if on cue, the two men heard footsteps that were getting louder and louder. Hiccup spat, getting rid of the remnants of vomit. It wasn't long before they were joined by Kamikaze and Heather. Zephyr was between them, holding both of the adult women by their hands. Hiccup smiled when he saw his daughter and crouched down. Hey there, sweetheart, Hiccup greeted her, doing his best to put on his most genuine smile. He spread his arms, trying to look as friendly as possible. He failed miserably at that, and he realized it only when he saw Zephyr back away from him. The small girl hugged even tighter Kamikaze's leg, hiding behind the older woman as much as possible. Hiccup's smile faded slowly from his lips. He dropped his arms, allowing them to hang loosely along his torso. He straightened himself back up. You might want to change your clothes before hugging her, Heather suggested after clearing her throat. The awkwardness of that moment was nearly unbearable. Hiccup nodded his head in agreement after getting rid of the initial shock. You're right, he agreed, shifting his legs awkwardly. I guess that it will be for the best if Zephyr stays with you tonight, he declared, eyeing carefully his daughter. He felt his heart break at the sight. His little girl was terrified of him. We will take her, Kamikaze replied, hugging the small girl. Hiccup's daughter was still clutching her leg tightly. I'll see you in the morning, Hiccup said, indicating that he wanted the two women gone. Heather and Kamikaze nodded wordlessly and left the two men alone. Did you see how Zephyr looked at me? Hiccup asked Irette when he was sure that they weren't within their hearing range anymore. I've never seen her so terrified, he added, gulping loudly. Well, to be honest, you look quite horrifying, Irette chuckled. I can bet all my money that if you charged in to fight dressed like that, you would scare everyone off without having to fight anybody. It's not funny, Irette Hiccup replied. He didn't sound amused at all. I don't want Zephyr to have any reasons to fear me, he explained. She's my daughter, for fuck's sake, he exclaimed loudly. Whoa, 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 calm down, Chief, Irette said, using his hands to articulate. I only wanted to lighten the mood, that's all, he tried to explain, but Hiccup wasn't in a mood to listen to it. I can't wait to find out how you will react when your child will be terrified of you, he snapped at him. We'll see if you find that funny as well, he added through clenched teeth. She's my daughter, he yelled at him. Irette lifted his hands in a defensive manner. I know, he replied, trying to calm Hiccup down. I'm not questioning that. I was just trying to lighten the mood, you know. You and Zephyr aren't the only ones who are affected by the eagle. Oh, really? Hiccup asked, rolling his eyes. From what I could see, you were having great fun, he snapped at Irette once again. The former dragon trapper rolled his eyes as well. I used to be a mercenary, blood doesn't scare me, he explained, shrugging his shoulders. But other members of our tribe, well, let's just say that it had to be the first time they've ever witnessed the Blood Eagle. He chuckled again. And I'm sure that Dager's corpse will serve as a nice reminder who is the chief around here. It had to be done, Hiccup replied, more likely trying to convince himself that his decision was right. Dager didn't make it through the execution. He didn't deserve the proper burial, he explained, recalling the man's screams. It sent an unpleasant shiver down his spine. You kept your word, Irette praised him with a small smile on his lips. None of us will be seeing Dager in the afterlife. I certainly hope so, Hiccup murmured, feeling his stomach calm down. Weren't you afraid that they would recognize you? Irette asked, changing the topic. The Burkians, I mean, he clarified when he saw the questioning look on Hiccup's face. The young chief shook his head. They haven't recognized me during the day when I forgot my helmet. There was no way they would now, he answered. He was truly grateful that he didn't have to face the consequences of his earlier mistake. That black-haired boy was the cousin you told me about? Irette asked him. Boy, he asked in disbelief, not answering his question directly. We're practically the same age. You think I'm a boy too? No, you're a man, Hiccup, Irette countered. But it's not only the age that makes someone an adult. I've watched him during the execution. Let's just say that I've seen younger mercenaries who could handle much more than he. Your cousin stopped watching right after you've opened Dager's back. That's not a good chief material if I did say so myself. If you knew Snotlout more, you would know that in many aspects he is incapable of being a chief, Hiccup replied with a small chuckle. For the first time that night, he felt his mood lighten up a little. Honestly, I'm not surprised that he wasn't watching. Well, he wasn't the only one. Others weren't watching as well, save for that pretty blonde of yours and your father. The fat one tried to watch, but he also was turning his head in the other direction from time to time. I knew that my father would watch, Hiccup admitted, recalling Stoic's expression. He has never seen his father so terrified before. He's the strongest Viking I know. The same goes for Astrid, he added after a moment of hesitation. No matter what you think of them, you've gained their respect, Irette replied. They fear you. It was as clear as day. If I knew that I would have to go through something like this, I would never agree to be a chief, Hiccup countered, shaking his head in disbelief. The full weight of his actions still didn't fall down on him. I've killed people earlier, but it was always during a fight. Never before have I executed someone. Every chief has to go through it at some point, Irette replied, once again shrugging his shoulders. I wish I didn't, Hiccup murmured. Irette didn't reply to that. I'm going back home, he said after a moment of silence. I've had enough for one night. Why do I have a feeling that you might come across the Great Hall on your way back home and leave it with a barrel of ale? Irette commented, chuckling slightly. It's terrifying how well you know me, Irette. Underscore 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 underscore. They were already back in their cells. Astrid and her companions were escorted back to the prison immediately after the man's corpse was spread on the 2 trees, right next to the place where the execution took place. None of them dared to say a word on their way back, as if they were afraid that by breaking the silence that had fallen on the village, they would earn themselves the exact same punishment. The 2 guards that were escorting them also didn't say a word. Astrid was sitting in her cell, hugging her knees tightly. Even though she was back in the safety of her cell, she couldn't get rid of the fear that was holding her in a tight grasp. She was staring at some random point on the floor, still trying to comprehend what she had just witnessed. From what she has noticed with a corner of her eye, the rest of Burkians were in a similar state. That man is a psycho, Snotlout spoke, breaking the silence. Astrid lifted her gaze to look at the man that one day would become her chief. And her husband. Apparently one has to have balls to go through the Blood Eagle, she commented. Are you kidding me? He nearly yelled. That wasn't the Blood Eagle. It was some sadistic shit he did out there. It was the Blood Eagle, Stoic replied, not lifting his gaze. He too was recovering from the shock of witnessing it for the first time. Perhaps now you will be more careful with your threats, he scolded his nephew. Snotlout didn't come up with any response. Astrid couldn't help smirking. Turns out you're not so brave after all, Roughnout teased him. Even in the dark of their cells, they could clearly see Snotlout's face going red from anger and embarrassment. Shut up, he replied. You also weren't looking, remember? But I've never threatened anyone with the Blood Eagle, she countered. Snotlout didn't reply to that. Why did they take us to the execution? Astrid asked the question that seemed to be lingering in the minds of everyone. We're not part of their tribe, there was no reason for us to see it. There was one reason, Stoic countered, his voice was heavy. It was a warning. Chapter 9. The fire was everywhere. The night air was filled with smoke and screams of his fellow villagers, who were dying all around him. He was looking frantically around in a futile attempt to find any means of escape. It wasn't the first time the Berserkers attacked a village in the archipelago. They had been warned about the possible attack, but they weren't prepared. They were only farmers and fishermen Vikings who wanted to leave in peace, expecting that everyone else would accept it. They were wrong. The Berserkers outnumbered them heavily. They were spreading across the village faster than the eye could notice, setting everything afire. The red flames were consuming everything on their path, homes, boats, and whatever else was made out of wood. He tried to scream for help, call Toothless or anyone else, but the smoke caused the voice to die in his throat. He coughed violently, searching for any form of weapon that could be useful against the invaders. He wasn't a farmer nor a fisherman, he was a warrior and the first Viking to ride on a dragon. He wasn't useless anymore. Hiccup found a sword just in time to see a man walking slowly in his direction. He had a horned helmet on his head and an axe in his hand. Illuminated by the omnipresent fire, he looked like a demon from Helheim. Dager, he realized, feeling a cold shiver running down his spine. The Berserker leader was still approaching him steadily, crossing the distance between them. Hiccup tried to turn around, though his legs refused to listen to him. He knew he had to run, he didn't stand a chance against the man who has already been killed by him. Dager had had to find a way to escape Helheim and return as a demon to take revenge on Hiccup. Accepting the fact that his legs refused to listen to him, the young Viking corrected his grip on the sword he had found, preparing himself to fight against Dager once again. The leader of the Berserkers increased his speed, charging at him with a terrifying battle roar. His axe was raised high above his head, ready to kill Hiccup in a single, swift cut. The young Viking raised his sword, defending himself from the incoming attack. He didn't anticipate the strength behind the blow, though, causing him to stumble a few steps backward, nearly losing his footing. Dager wasn't going to give him a chance to correct his stance as he was already moving towards him, ready to attack him once again. Hiccup rolled to the side, barely avoiding the blade of the axe that would have easily split his head in two. Forcing himself to a standing position, he charged at Dager, who was raising his axe from the ground. Hiccup swung his sword, attempting to cut his enemy from the side, though his attack was easily parried. Using the momentum, Hiccup turned around on his heel, hitting Dager in the head. The attack bought him some time as the Berserker leader stumbled a few steps backward, taken aback by the sudden attack. Even though it wasn't lethal, it besotted Hiccup's opponent, and his helmet fell from his head. Hiccup blinked a few times in shock when his opponent straightened himself, looking at him with nothing but pure rage in his eyes. Beneath the horned helmet, his face was hidden, covered with white paint and the two red stripes that crossed his eyes and stopping right above his beard. It was him from the execution. Hiccup didn't even have time to react, still recovering from the shock, as his opponent attacked him again, burying the axe deep in his chest. Underscore 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 underscore. Hiccup woke up with a scream, instantly sitting up on the bed. He was gasping loudly, touching the area on his chest where the axe made contact with his skin. Sweat was running down all over his face, stinging his eyes. He blinked a few times to get rid of the salty liquid. It took him a few seconds to realize it was only a dream. There was no hole in his body, and he was in the safety of his own house. He sighed loudly with relief, allowing himself to fall on the bed. He was still panting heavily, but his heartbeat was slowly returning to its normal tempo. He wiped his face, getting rid of the sweat that was covering it. Hiccup closed his eyes, attempting to calm down his breathing. It was just a dream, he kept repeating to himself as some kind of prayer. It took him a few minutes to calm down fully. Hiccup glanced hesitantly at the window. The sun has just risen from the horizon, painting everything with the shades of red, orange, and yellow. Even though he went to sleep at a very late hour, he decided to get up, refusing to allow the dream to trap him once again. He left his bedroom with hesitant steps as if he was afraid that the outside world would turn out to be the one from his nightmare, even though he was in a completely different village. And Dager is dead, he repeated to himself, recalling the events of the previous night. He walked down the stairs, still a little groggy from sleep and a few cups of ale he drank after the execution. Toothless lifted his head after hearing Hiccup's footsteps. The black dragon wagged his tail, excited to see his rider. The young Viking greeted him with a weak smile and approached the wooden tub that has still been filled with water. Even though he had made sure to wash away even the smallest droplet of blood, Hiccup still felt uneasy. He could still feel the paint that used to cover his face during the execution, even though it was long gone. It burned his skin as if the paint has been made out of acid. After reaching the tub that was filled with dirty water, Hiccup examined himself carefully. There was no trace of the executioner he was during the night. That didn't stop him from splashing the water against his face a couple of times, though. The cold liquid gave him some sort of relief and helped to wake him up fully. The burning sensation was persistent, though, crawling beneath his skin like some hideous disease. Toothless nudged him against his hand, growling questioningly. If it was possible, the dragon had a worried expression on its face. Hiccup smiled at the Night Fury, appreciating the polite gesture and understanding a hidden message that has been hidden deep within the dragon's eyes. Yeah, but he agreed, patting Toothless on the snout. Flying is a good idea, he said. The dragon growled a few more times, content that his rider understood what he meant. Hiccup, accompanied by Toothless, left his house. He grabbed a hooded, furred cloak, feeling the cold air even while still being inside. He took a small glance at the embers in the hearth. His white tunic was almost completely gone, consumed by fire. He sighed with relief once again, content that the events of the previous night were becoming a part of the history. After opening the door, Hiccup was welcomed with bright sunlight and a cold winter breeze. His breath was turning into vapor. He corrected his cloak, pulling the hood over his head. Small snowflakes were falling from the sky, slowly covering the ground with a thin white layer. The snow was crunching beneath his boots, squealing lightly. Hiccup breathed in deeply, allowing the cold air to fill his lungs. Despite the cold, he enjoyed the smell of the winter. Toothless growled impatiently, earning himself a small chuckle from Hiccup. Okay, bud, let's go, he declared, sitting at the saddle. With ease, he attached his left leg to the mechanism that controlled the artificial tail fin. Even though he had upgraded the dragon's prosthesis long ago, allowing Toothless to fly without him, the Night Fury always refused to go alone. Hiccup patted his closest friend on the snout, giving him a sign that he was ready. In a blink of an eye, they were in the air, quickly approaching the layer of clouds. The higher they were, the colder it was getting. Hiccup corrected his cloak once again, wrapping himself tightly with the clothing. He looked behind, seeing as his island was getting more and more distant, finally disappearing behind the clouds. He felt his breath freezing on his mustache, creating a thin layer of ice. Once again, he breathed in deeply, allowing himself to rest against Toothless' back. Even so high in the air, the dragon's warmth could have been felt. Hiccup stabilized the mechanism that controlled the artificial tailfin, allowing the Night Fury to fly as it wanted. What have I done, Toothless? He asked his friend, almost expecting to receive an answer. He could still feel Dager's blood on his skin, it was irritating. No one should die like that, he commented, nearly whispering that sentence. He cursed himself silently for allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment. The worst part is that I have seen myself as him tonight, he revealed, earning himself a confused growl. I've had the same nightmare Zephyr has every now and then. But it wasn't Dager who attacked the village, it was me, he explained, sighing heavily. Did you see how she looked at me yesterday? Never before have I seen her so terrified, even when she was waking up after having a nightmare, he said, hiding his face behind his hands. Toothless growled again, sensing his rider's uneasiness. Hiccup patted him on his back appreciatively, whispering a silent thanks. They were flying for a few more minutes, enjoying the all-too-familiar feeling of being high in the air, outside of everyone's reach. Hiccup sometimes wondered if he had flown high enough, would he be able to reach Valhalla? He would most certainly have tried if it wasn't for Zephyr. He couldn't abandon her. He straightened himself up after noticing that Toothless turned around. The dragon dove, passing the layers of clouds and heading back to their island. Hiccup nudged him to give him a sign to fly steadily. He knew what could help him think clearly. It took Toothless a split second to realize what his rider intended. He accepted the command and leveled his flight, soaring in line with the sea. Hiccup detached his safety harness, taking in a shaky breath. He had done it countless times by now, but still, he always felt a little uneasy. Without moving a single muscle, he slipped down from Toothless' back, falling directly towards the cold dark waters of the sea. He loved that feeling. The free falling was one of his most favorite activities that gave him an illusion of actually being a dragon, even though he couldn't fly. He found Toothless with his eyes, seeing that the Night Fury was close to him, ready to position himself right below the young chief. Hiccup smiled at that. His cloak was being windblown, the hood fell from his head, surrounding him with the cold air. His messy hair, for once, was not getting into his eyes, allowing him to see clearly what was waiting below him. The dark waves were approaching rapidly, threatening to swallow him if Toothless would react a split second too late. Hiccup stretched out both of his arms as if he was pretending to have wings. He would have laughed if the air wasn't blocking his voice. But it was time to return to the safety of the saddle. The young chief turned around sluggishly in the air, preparing himself to get on Toothless' back. The Night Fury reacted instantly and increased its pace, flying right below Hiccup. The Viking landed in the saddle with a soft thud, though it wasn't a soft landing. Still, it was better than landing in the cold water, which has happened a few times in the past. Hiccup looked below, surprised at how close they were to the sea. The distance couldn't have been bigger than 50 meters. He even felt the water splash against them each time Toothless bit his wings. Good job, but he praised him. The dragon crooned happily, appreciating the comment. Seems like you're getting better and better at catching me, Hiccup added, chuckling slightly. He received an irritated hit from Toothless, who used his ear to do this. Hiccup laughed again, apologizing and admitting that it was him who was getting better at free falling. They were returning to Driki, that was slowly waking up. Even from afar, Hiccup noticed the single silhouettes of his villagers slowly coming out from their homes. Toothless flew higher, heading straight to their cabin. Go lower, Hiccup ordered suddenly, surprising Toothless with the command. I have to do something first, he explained, not looking at him. His eyes were focused on Dager's corpse that was becoming more and more visible the closer they were to the island. He pulled his hood back over his head after noticing that the Burkians were already working. They might have not recognized him the previous day, but it didn't mean that he would remain anonymous to them forever. It was better not to push his luck any further. Except for the Burkians and a few guards, there was almost no one around. His villagers weren't surprised to hear the characteristic sound of the Night Fury, followed by the black dragon landing amidst the houses. Their unexpected guests were taken aback by his sudden appearance, though. Hiccup chuckled lightly after seeing a few of the Burkians lost their footings, terrified of the unholy offspring of lightning and death itself. Steinar ordered them to pick up their tools and resume their work. The guard nodded at Hiccup, greeting him. The young chief returned the gesture. He observed the group of Burkians for a few seconds while leaving Toothless' back. His father was looking at him with hatred in his eyes that was colored with fear, caused by the events of the last night and the fact that the Night Fury was standing beside him. So all Stoic could do was watch and return to the task that had been given to him and his companions. Others followed his example and wordlessly continued repairing the destroyed houses. Every now and then, two of the Burkians would leave the main group and head towards the forest to get more wood, always accompanied by one of the guards. Dager was hanging nearby, silently observing their work with his unseeing eyes. Hiccup approached the corpse carefully as if in fear that the berserker leader might suddenly come alive. The young chief trembled slightly. Luckily for him, that sight didn't cause his stomach to return its contents. He closed his eyes, taking in a few calming breaths. With each step, he was getting closer and closer to the dead body that was swinging slightly, moved by the gentle wind. He decided to open his eyes when he felt he was close enough. Hiccup looked up, standing no further than a few meters from the corpse. Dager's blood was already dry, and his body was being slowly covered by snow. He noticed two ravens standing on the corpse's shoulders, attracted by meat. They were digging their beaks into the dead man, each time tearing out a small piece of flesh. They were squawking from time to time as if they wanted to chase away anyone who would want to deprive them of their feast. The young chief picked up a small rock from the ground and threw it at the birds, scaring them away effectively. "Steinar!" Hiccup exclaimed without turning around. His eyes were focused on Dager. He didn't have to wait long for the reply as the guard approached him almost instantly. "Yes, Chief," he asked, also looking at the corpse. "Give me your sword," Hiccup ordered, still not looking at him. Steinar fulfilled the order without a single complaint, unsheathing his weapon. He handed it to his chief, unsure of what he intended to do. Surprising everyone who was gathered at the plaza, including himself, Hiccup began cutting down the ropes that were attached to Dager's limbs, causing the corpse to fall to the ground. The young chief took a few steps backward, barely avoiding being hit by the dead body. Dager fell on his chest, giving Hiccup a good view at his opened back. He scowled a little, looking away for a few seconds. He returned the sword to its owner, who had a puzzled expression on his face. "What are you doing?" Steinar managed to ask after a moment of silence. Hiccup was kneeling in front of Dager, attempting to return his body to its previous state. He put the partially eaten lungs back to their original place and folded the wings made out of skin and ribs. He lifted his head to look at one of the guards. "He suffered enough," he replied simply, letting Steinar know that there was no room for argument. "Bring me the shovel," he added, turning Dager around for him to lie on his back. Still confused, Steinar nodded and went to fulfill the command, returning after a short while with a tool in his hands. He gave the item to his chief, who thanked him with a subtle nod and ordered him to get back to his duty. With a small sigh, Hiccup lifted Dager from the ground, placing his arms beneath his knees and back. The shovel was lying on the corpse. Without looking at anyone, Hiccup began walking into the depths of the forest. After a few dozen minutes of walking, accompanied by Toothless and the gentle sounds of the forest, Hiccup reached a small clearing. He laid Dager on the ground, sighing heavily. Despite getting stronger through the past few years, it was still difficult to carry someone through hundreds of meters on uneven terrain. He stretched his back, hearing a few quiet cracks in his spine. With yet another sigh, Hiccup picked up the shovel and began digging. It took him almost 3 hours to dig out a hole that was big enough to fit Dager. Despite the winter cold, his cloak and tunic were lying on Toothless' back, tossed unceremoniously by Hiccup. He shivered slightly after finishing his work. He wiped his forehead that was covered with sweat and dirt and clambered out of the hole. He sighed heavily again, thrusting the shovel into the ground. He walked over to Toothless and picked up his tunic, pulling it over his head. The dragon growled quietly and nuzzled Hiccup against his chest, attempting to warm him up a little bit. The young Viking chuckled slightly, appreciating the effective gesture. Hiccup approached Dager's corpse and picked him up from the ground. His muscles were protesting slightly, but he ignored that. He carried the dead body to the hole and dropped him down, seeing no other way of placing him in the makeshift tomb. He scowled after hearing that some of the Dager's ribs broke after impact. Without wasting any time, he began burying the corpse. It was much easier than digging a hole, and Hiccup had finished before he even noticed. He rested against the shovel that was thrust into the ground. He was observing the brown mark in the center of the clearing, surrounded by a white layer of snow. Toothless was sitting close to him as if he was trying to support his rider with his presence. "I'm sorry," Hiccup said after a moment. His throat was dry, but it didn't stop him though. "No one should have died like this," he added, gulping loudly to lubricate his throat somehow. "You were crazy," he admitted, panting slightly. "But you were still a Viking. You deserved to die like a warrior," he clarified, looking at the buried hole where the corpse was. I'm sorry that I have denied you the entrance to the Valhalla. Rest peacefully, Dagur, he said, turning around and leaving the small clearing. Toothless followed him closely, walking right beside his rider. Chapter 10. Astrid grunted slightly after lifting a tree trunk and placing it on the rack. It was carried there by Fishlegs and Tough Nut, who were chopping down the trees in the nearby forest. She brushed away a strand of hair that fell into her eyes. Just as the day before, they had been awoken by the gods as soon as the sun had revealed itself at the horizon. It wasn't anything new for her to wake up so early, she would often do it back on Berk, finding the early workout to be the most effective for her. But she always made sure to get proper sleep during the night, and this time she had been denied it.